My name is Alan Madden, Gadigal Elder. For my first song, nah, only kidding. Married man, not kidding. 10 children, 26 grandchildren, and 17 great. Yes, we did have TV. Just couldn't afford the bloody electricity. Born and bred in Redfern, the capital of Sydney. Well, we think it is anyway. Welcome to country to me is always an honour and pleasure. Just to give you a little bit of an insight of where you are and who we are. As we've all welcomed the countries, firstly, I'd like to acknowledge our First Nations and traditional owners of the lands that you may have come from or work upon, and pay my respects to all our Aboriginal elders, all elders, past and present, also pay my respects. To all our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters, from whatever Aboriginal or island nation you may have come from, welcome to Gadigal. And to all our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters here today, a very warm and sincere welcome to you to Gadigal. No matter where you've come from, whether it be across the seas, across the state, or across town, once again, a very warm and sincere welcome to you to Gadigal. And as I've mentioned many times before, was, is, and always will be Aboriginal land. Only three things short than that: coming, taxation, and going. It's an honour and pleasure to be here today to welcome one and all to Gadigal. Gadigal is one of 29 clans of the Eora Nation. The Eora Nation is bounded by nature's own, the Hawkesbury River to the north, the Peene to the west, and Georges River to the south. And in between those three mighty rivers is the Eora Nation. And in that nation, there are 29 clans. And the clan's land we're on today is Gadigal. On behalf of members of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council and of the Gadigal mob, once again, a very warm and sincere welcome to you to Gadigal. There's an old Aboriginal saying out there, I think it's very appropriate for you mob here today. They say, where there's a will, there's relatives. So once again, on behalf of the Land Council and of the Gadigal mob, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you.
Everybody, hello. I'm so excited to see a room full of people today. Thank you to Uncle Alan for that amazing welcome to country. And on behalf of Kalydeco and Art of Work, I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of land here at MCA, as well as the traditional custodians of land wherever you may be joining us from on the live stream as well. Couple of housekeeping matters for people in the room before we get started. If we do need to evacuate today, right next to the accessible bathroom next to the lift, there's doors on the right-hand side, stairs down to evacuate, and we have an assembly point in that garden on the right side of the building. But we will have our security personnel here who will escort us if we need to leave at any point. Bathrooms also out this way. So we're delighted to see so many people interested in taking a step change on health and safety board performance reporting. We want to give you an understanding of how and why this particular group of safety leaders who came together to develop the Due Diligence Index for Safety wanted to spend time exploring an alternative to the traditional metrics, what that might actually look like, and then showcase what we've come up with so far. We really see this as the start of a community of practice, coming together to focus boards on the things that matter and to inform the future development of this open source due diligence index for safety. We want you to join us through the Due Diligence Index Council, and I hope by the end of the sessions today, you will be excited to do so. I'm Alana Titterton, partner at the law firm Clyde & Co. Delighted to be your MC for the session today and walk you through the various discussions that we have. So we're going to start on the discussion of theory and concepts that underpin the Due Diligence Index, and then we'll do a demonstration of the Due Diligence Index for you, and we have a case study from one of the pilot participants, and then a bit of a Q&A panel with our pilot participants as well, as they've gone about implementing due diligence indicators in their businesses. So throughout the day, we're also going to be conducting some live polling. You'll see some QR codes on your tables. We're also going to have the QR codes coming up on the screen at various points of the day. So you are allowed to use phones, but only for live polling purposes. And the whole point of the live polling is we want to capture where everyone is in this journey so far on some of the key concepts we're going to be talking about throughout the discussion today. And that you give are only going to identify your industry. But following the full day event, what we want to do is capture a summary of the data and send it out to everyone, so there's learning out of the back of that as well. And you'll also be able to see those results in real time as we go through. So you can participate by scanning the QR codes that will appear on the screen periodically with your phone camera. And as I've said, copies also on the table in front of you if you're in the room. We encourage you to get involved and ask questions throughout the sessions today. And we're also going to come back and explore some of those summary results throughout the discussion. We've got Roger Harvey joining us. Where is Roger? Hello, Roger. Roger Harvey, fabulous cartoonist extraordinaire, who's going to be live sketching our day as well. Thanks for joining us, Roger. And we're going to see what Roger puts up on screen every so often. Yeah, round of applause for Roger. We've got morning tea around 11:15 and lunch scheduled for 12:30. And also, I want to make sure that people in the live stream, please participate as well. Put comments in the live chat and we will be keeping an eye on that. If you've got questions that you want to ask people throughout the sessions today, please do put those questions in the live chat as well. All right, without further ado, we might get started with the first session of the day. So to kick us off, I'm delighted that I will be joined in conversation with two of the greats today. Michael Toomer, Clyde & Co.'s Australian Managing Partner and Global Head of the Health and Safety Practice. Come on down. And we also have Professor Sydney Decker from Griffith University joining us, beaming on into the room. He just wanted to be the largest head in the room on the screens, right? So we've got Sydney beaming as well. Now, I doubt that I will be able to get a word in edgeways when it comes to the next hour of power I have with my two fabulous guests. But I'm going to try to answer questions, and I hope that I get those questions in. I might join you down here. Yeah, cool. Hi, Michael, how are you? Nice to see you. All right. And do we have Sydney? Yes, fabulous. All right. So, Sydney, Michael, I want to start by asking the question, what's wrong with traditional health and safety performance board metrics? And that's a big question.
You're going to get Sydney to go first because he'll need the full 2 hours that answer.
Are you going first?
I'll give a short version. There are a lot of things that are wrong
with traditional metrics for measuring health and safety, TRIFR, LTI, LTIFR, most people in this room will be well familiar with some of the flaws. For me, some of the most confronting issues to do with those measures is the fact that they don't do anything that we advertise them to do. Firstly, they're not comparable. We think we're comparing like for like. That is absolutely not the case. If you're comparing your TRIFR stat globally, you're comparing against two different standards, two different measures. If you're comparing it with your peers, it depends what's counted, what's not counted. Are you counting contractors? Are you not counting contractors? And so at least from that basic perspective, they're not comparable measures. So their primary selling point, which is that, hey, we've got a number and we can see how we compare to other peers in relation to that number, actually doesn't stack up to any scrutiny. I won't steal Sydney's thunder, but he will also tell you that it's not statistically significant in any event in terms of a rate, in terms of what you are measuring. Then you've got the disincentives that are created through those measures, and the attempts by most to try and manipulate those figures. So if someone is falling down from a ladder, if you're quick enough, you can cancel the next shift, and then there won't be a LTI statistic for you. So I participated in some discussions at conferences where, after my session talking about legal obligations, someone was kind of educating people of how, well, what we need to do is make sure that someone is put on return to work duties just quickly enough so it doesn't actually affect our figures. You can imagine my shock and surprise about the prevalence of those activities. So it really, on those two counts alone, they are troubling measures. And then the fact that they are negative performance indicators. So they're not actually indicators of a state of safety. They're not forward-looking in any way. They don't tell you whether you are safe or unsafe. They just tell you that you have a number of injuries that have taken place. And the most confronting example of that I encountered was a presentation by a mining company where they showed their TRIFR statistics, and they showed how amazing they had been over the last 5 years. And they showed, their LTIs, and everyone was in awe because they expected that particular mining company to be a leader. And then the senior executive, to their credit, said, "But hang on a second, every single one of those LTIs that I'm showing you are fatalities." And so, in a sense, it gives you no indication of the state of safety. It is not a predictor of pending disaster, for example. It's not a predictor of the number of fatalities you've had. It's just a number that really means absolutely nothing. My only comment that I use those numbers for is to board members that many of you have heard me say this. When you have a period of prolonged zero LTI, that would be a good indicator that you're about to have a disaster, because typically speaking, every disaster has been preceded by a prolonged period of LTI. So it serves a purpose, but not the purpose it was designed to serve.
Sydney?
Articulate as usual and well argued. Are you hearing me good?
Yep.
Perfect.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Let me emphasize two things and then add two, because otherwise we just keep saying the same thing. I hope colleagues, and it's wonderful to have so many of you gathered on the call and in the room. I hope that we're preaching to the choir. That doesn't mean that we can make things more explicit and nuanced and explain some of the thinking behind it all, which is what we're going to do. But it's not necessarily about proselytizing. We have a better way. There is light at the end of this tunnel. But that we're in a tunnel and we stay in a tunnel if you keep doing TRIFR or LTI is bloody obvious. So the two things I wanted to emphasize that Michael said. One is it's not a protection against legal liability. It isn't, and it isn't, and then it isn't. And so the illusion that with low numbers of injuries, incidents, low numbers of any negative, that you somehow protect yourselves against anything legal is a deep and jurisprudentially proven illusion, which Michael can talk about much more at greater length and with, I think, beautiful examples. The second one is, and that also is emphasizing what Michael said, is it mispredicts. Colleagues, it mispredicts. The lower your LTI, the more likely, as Michael said, and this is what the research keeps returning from field to field to field, the more likely you're going to have a big bang at the end of the week, the month, the year, whatever period you're measuring. And so if it predicts anything, it's that you might get in trouble very soon. But I wanted to add two more important things. I think on reflection, and when we step back a little bit and think about what this says about us and about us as a community, not just us as a community of businesses and organizations wanting to do the right thing, but what it says about us as humans, as fellow human beings, as colleagues. And it's these two things. The first one is that we seem to be doing LTI on what sociology calls a consensus authority. What that means is that everybody is doing it because everybody is doing it. And so, because everybody's doing it, everybody's doing it. And that leads to this really strange behavior of crowds, which has been documented in the research very well, where rationality goes out the window. We just do what everybody else is doing because that's what everybody else is doing. So that's what we should be doing. And so out goes any critical questioning, any critical thinking, any suggestion that, well, hang on, there may be an alternative. No, everybody's doing this, so we got to do this. So why were we doing this? Because everybody is doing it. And what do you think the other guys say, right? Well, why are we doing this? Well, because everybody is doing it. And so we hold this aloft, uncritically, unreflectively, and rather stupidly in some sense. And so it is that type of behavior that I find insufferable among fellow human beings. As in, really? Can't we think? We have a brain, right? We have been equipped with that. So now, the second one that I think we really need to reflect on because of what it says about us. Michael has hinted at this, alluded to it, but I think it bears not just emphasizing, but unpacking even more. And that is, there is ample evidence, colleagues, that measuring negatives as an indicator of health and safety in your workplace dehumanizes the workplace. Let me say that again. It dehumanizes the workplace. It dehumanizes our relations with each other. It dehumanizes what we count as success. It dehumanizes human resources. It dehumanizes various policies and procedures and things that we have in place to manage both people and processes. And ultimately, it says something really, really destructive about us. Is this how we want to relate to each other? Is this how we want to think about our colleagues, as a liability that might bring our bonus down, or that might bring our numbers down or up and make us look bad in the eyes of others? The dehumanization really goes quite far and deep. We know about retributive just culture systems and algorithms on the wall that some of you might have, which are indivisibly connected with this commitment to having a workplace with low numbers of negatives, which are indivisibly connected with seeing people as your problem to control, and some people more so than others, some contractors more than others. And so what it leads to ultimately is a set of relationships and a set of ways of connecting to each other that are not constructive, that are not humanizing the workplace in the sense of we're in this together. Nobody comes to work to do a bad job. How can we set each other up for success? And this really, at the end of the day, Michael, I think is what we want to flip. Back to you.
Michael, one of the things that people often say about TRIFA when we're kind of trying to change this conversation is, well, hang on a minute, don't I need that because laws? Is it right that you need TRIFA for legal reasons? And if not, what should we be focusing on in that legal context?
Alan, it's interesting that the people who say that we need TRIFA for legal reasons, not lawyers. And I find it very interesting. Some of you may say this, for a profession of safety practitioners who seem to be absolutely not obsessed with laws and use laws to justify a lot of things that are really should be justified based on safety principles. As you know, we've undertaken a survey of as a project for a major client of all of the laws in which that particular organisation, a global organisation, operated in, and being one of the largest companies in their industry, it pretty much covered the globe, and certainly all jurisdictions that have developed health and safety laws. Not a single piece of legislation requires TRIFR. Not a single piece of legislation prescribes TRIFR. There are many pieces of legislation that require reporting of incidents. Australian laws do require reporting of incidents. They do not require the measuring of incidents in the way in which TRIFR measures it. They do not require the measure of LTIs or LTIFRs in the way that organisations measure it. There is an Australian standard in relation to how you measure a number of those measures. People didn't make them up in Australia. There's a global standard in which helps you count those things, but all of those instruments are legal obligations. So the myth is because I'm measuring them means I'm monitoring. Well, that doesn't quite. You're required to monitor performance, and you're required to do that by laws and certainly by Australian laws. That monitoring and how you go about monitoring and responding and reacting is left entirely up to you. And now you are required to respond to incidents as you should, but you're also required to respond to risks and hazards in your organisation. And from a due diligence perspective, that's one of the elements of due diligence, and it's called out in the same breath, in the same section, the same subsection of that particular act. So the elevation of an incident defined in a particular way, defined frankly differently from organisation to organisation, and the elevation of that to be a legal obligation doesn't stack up from a legal perspective. And I'll be interested in anyone who wants to show me a section in Australia or elsewhere that requires that as a measure.
Anyone want to take the bait? So why should board health and safety metrics be based on safety capacity? Why is that?
Well, I want to respond to that by starting with the journey of how we got here, and I want to also acknowledge a number of people in the room who were on this journey with us, and I see a number of them. I see Krista there. I see Kurt. I see Belinda, and I'm sorry, I probably missed 3 or 4 others who are in the room, but I just can't spot you right now. But we came on this journey through an analysis. Trying to come up with a measure that would replace TRIFR. And our first instinct was to lean into a lead indicator that exists already. Surely there is something that people are measuring and using that exists already, so that we're not inventing the wheel, as say. And ask why that is this, but that's the saying.
We've changed the world, Michael.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. We can debate that some other time. When we did the analysis, and Kelvin, I think you led that analysis. When we did that analysis with a spreadsheet that went for hundreds and hundreds of lines, certainly quite a few pages. And as I recall it was a meeting that we had in Brisbane, and we then put the measure against each of those lead indicators, and not a single one stacked up. And the problem was, as I saw it, as others saw it, that were transferable from organisation to organisation. Basically, the leading indicators that worked for one organisation didn't seem to work for another. And some just simply were a different way of counting things rather than progressing safety in the organisation. So the starting point, Alna, as you know, that room, was, well, what is it that we're trying to achieve? If due diligence is what we're trying to achieve, if we're actually trying to get a handle on the extent to which are leading the organisation from a safety perspective to promote the right outcomes, then shouldn't that be our starting point? So we effectively used the elements of due diligence as our starting point, and then went in our bag of tricks, the safety 2 sphere, and tried to think about how we might come up with measures that reflect that. I think one of the breakthrough moments, as I recall it, was in London at a sort of museum, Natural History Museum. That's Kelvin.
Painting the picture for you all.
Back of a napkin, as I recall, or maybe it was a piece of paper. And it's quite fitting that we were in another museum in a different part of the world for this launch. And then we started mapping out those elements, and then the aha moment was when we connected back with the balance of the team to see how they measure up with the theory of what it's about, what Holnagel talks about in terms of the theory of safety differently and safety 2. And remarkably, there was a good synergy between those basic principles. So we knew we were onto something. The next challenge was, can we make it workable? Can we actually meet the criteria that we're trying to achieve? Can we create a community and a consensus around this, recognizing that it's a journey that we're on, and not necessarily a refined solution. And this is where we enlisted a number of colleagues in this room to actually test out some of the ideas and to refine them. And we'll hear from the early adopters who supported us through this process around what they found challenging and what they found worked. Through that process that we've actually come up with what is now the due diligence index. So to answer your question, I get paid by the minute, as you can tell, or 6-minute units, as my clients are fond of telling me. Good value.
You
Not
feel
cheap,
it, don't
just good
you?
value.
Every single one of those units. I'm feeling that from you.
But to answer your question, it fits the bill because it's being created for that purpose. So it's a comparable measure. It allows a board to look at their performance and compare it to another organisation's performance. It's a measure that has been designed for a board, for an executive, for a leadership team, and has the ability to cascade down the organisation to be able to collect the data points to be collected up. It leans into activities and processes that are designed to build build insight into how work is really done, how things actually happen on the ground, rather than just measuring incidents, or as some of the lead indicators try to do, measuring mere activities. It's calibrated, so it's harder to game, in that each of the measures, as you see in the standard, has a built-in quality assurance capability that allows that to be more than just measuring activities, rather having a quality interaction at every stage of that particular activity. It is true to the idea that boards have limited attention spans and require numbers. And so we've leaned into the fact that boards require numbers. And if you don't present it as numbers, then what you're doing is that it's not as important as the financial numbers that sit next to the same report. so it has a number. That number is meaningful, and it has the additional advantage of being built for legal compliance, and that compliance, based on the tracking that we've done, would stack not only in Australia and New Zealand, where due diligence is an actual proactive obligation, but would stack up as a defence in jurisdictions like Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, the UK, where due diligence is built in as a defence. Same words. You're building your defence through measuring the extent of due diligence in your organisation, and then certainly meets or exceeds other jurisdictions that require that either don't have personal liability, like the United States, where what you're trying to do there is avoid class actions, lawsuits, rather than personal liability of directors and officers. That has that purpose, and certainly stacks up jurisdictions that are Ivan's you know, is much lower. Enough to do and talk about those laws as for you the across the world in relation to versatility of officers. There is a provision that there is a provision which talks about connivance, willful neglect. Consent, connivance, and willful neglect is the typical language, and the number of jurisdictions that have those provisions, or they have a built-in defence of due diligence. That's the balance of the jurisdictions I referred to, or the exception, which is the Australian provision, where it's a proactive duty of due diligence. And you can see how due diligence is the highest denominator, and therefore the highest standard, and therefore measuring yourself against that can give you the confidence, or should give you the confidence that you comply with all relevant standards, not just in Australia, but globally.
Sydney, that really mapped to your finding in the safety research anyway, yeah?
Yeah, so oh, wow. To me, it becomes an easy slam dunk when you come up with a measure that actually aligns with and is driven by the research, because it means that you have science at your back. Nobody has science at their back if they're measuring TRIFR and hoping to get some predictive out. In fact, the science suggests very much the opposite. So we have a measure that is about knowing, about understanding, about resourcing, about monitoring, about verifying, about complying. And this measure has indeed the research base from the last 10, 15 years firmly behind it. What question is there not to understand, right? What is there? What is get at the level though? It's always good to remind people that safety science in the last 12 years has made a dramatic shift in saying, yes, safety is about minimizing. Safety is about stopping things from going wrong. That's really how it has been since Heinrich, which continued the safety science through Jim Reason in the 1980s, Swiss cheese things, having and understanding how porous they are. Incredibly imperfect model, if it is even a model, but the shift away from that, and in fact the hard inversion, is to see safety not as the absence of negatives, but safety as the presence of positive capacities that make things go well. The more you have of those, the more things go well. And Eric, right, our celebrated colleague in this, that are indefatigable producer, keep saying that if things go right, they can't go wrong at the same time, right? If they go well, they cannot go wrong at the same. Just leave them in the universe. So, thinking about theory, then perhaps they may, but that's side of the scope of our hour here. So, within the world in which we work, that seems to make eminent sense. But if I loop this to the earlier point I was making about the dehumanization of our workplaces on the basis of measures like TRIFR, and us pulling away from that, I think we can see the mirror image in the due diligence index, that the due diligence measures actually about rehumanizing the workplace. They're about caring, about trying to understand what it means on the sharp end, what it means to practice operationally, what it means to do work under conditions of goal conflicts and resource constraints. And that understanding is key. It's not only to safety too, but to rehumanize the workplace. It shows that you, as I said, you give a damn. You care about how work actually gets done and what obstacles get in the way and what your role is and your accountabilities are in making those obstacles go away and what you can do to set people up for success. Hell, even the founding premise of all of it, which says people are not a problem to control. They are a resource. We came up with this in Safety Differently with many colleagues in the room. Years ago, people are not the problem. People are your resource. They are the solution, right? Harness it, work with them, try and understand where they're coming from. That founding premise itself is laced throughout this whole thing, right? People come to work to do a good job. We're going to help them do that even better. In order to do that, we need to measure these things. We need to understand these things. We need to know these things. We need to verify these things. And that's why we're doing this. And so all of this informs a wholesale conversion of your workplace from a dehumanizing, bureaucratically controlled, top-down managed, let's have low numbers because otherwise I'll lose my bonus kind of environment to one where we say, we're in this together. We're here to do this job. It's not going to be perfect because conditions will conspire against us. What do you need to do it better? Because I'm here to help.
Curiosity from boards and executive teams as well, because you're getting that understanding, it's happening, you're supporting through the work.
There is certainly that. There's always, of course, the objection, which we get from boards, and Michael has got this as well, that particularly in the larger organizations, people come back to us and say, hey, I mean, that's great, but we actually don't have time for all the details from all of our operational areas. There's multiple that. First of all, it's your job, right? But, there's only so much credit you can get for saying that multiple times. But I think the second is to say, that doesn't matter. What do we do in science? We take samples. We can't understand the whole world in one go. We would choke on the bloody thing, right? And so we take samples. That's what we do, right? That's what you can do. So all suited up and doing a management walk around, because those suck, right? Those are useless, right? There's many other ways in which to actually engage with work. But your typical management walk around as described in literature is not one of those. There's other ways to do that. And so take samples, show your face, show you can depend, right? Because in the presence is, of course, one of the is very much underpinning all of the ideas that this. Michael also in response, we are everywhere at the time. We have no option, right? And now DDI-S help us reach Michael if you have 70 people work for you.
There's a few things that to come from the discussion. The first thing is your comment about curiosity, and as you know, if you're looking at the due diligence standard as a option, the second element is all about curiosity, about getting up the name of the operations and associated with your operations. So unless you have a healthy degree of curiosity in relation to what goes on in your organization, you will likely fail that standard. And one of the interesting things is that none of the existing measures really engage with that. And as Sydney says, ultimately, the closest that we get to that is walkthroughs, walkarounds, and you can do them in a better way than they're done right now. And certainly, Eleanor, you and I talk to colleagues here in the room, talk to clients about how you can improve that if that is the approach that you take. But there are better ways in which you can actually engage in finding out what really goes on. The second thing that I wanted to pick up on what Sydney is saying, and by the way, I have a tag that says that I'm the only lawyer that Sydney likes. So just so
I hope
we're
I'm
all
also
clear.
a lawyer that's sitting
I
right, but
don't
whatever.
take my thunder. No, come on. But because if you don't know, Sydney has written many books, absolutely demolishing and demonizing lawyers, and then until he met me, then he didn't realize that they were actually a good kind. He will respond in a moment, I'm sure. But one of the things I want to pick up on is we've engaged with this exercise in the true spirit, safety differently, safety too. We're looking to be constructive. We're looking to be open source. We're looking for solutions. We're looking to create a community of collaboration. And I want to say this because I think anyone who throws rocks at this project disclose to the world they're about, what they stand for. If they want to be critical, they can community and help construct the new way forward. If they want to talk about something else completely different, then they're no different to the same one. It's a lot easier to take things down than to actually build. People in this room want to build something, do it as part of a community, trying to do it in a way that reflects their intellectual integrity. And I under that by saying intellectual integrity, because we all know that TRIFA does not have that integrity that we're talking about. So if we all agree on that, then we must find a way forward that replaces TRIFA. And we can only do it if all of us engage constructively in that discussion. This is the first version, first edition of the due diligence index standard. It's an open source tool. It's not a commercialized product. It's not something that we are trying to turn a profit from. It's not something that we are closing to the world. We're saying be part of this community and be part of improving it. We haven't got it right. We think we've done a pretty good job of getting a standard that stacks up, but we do not have a monopoly on ideas. And the reason that we wanted to create this community of people is to actually invite everyone to be part of the discussion and to be part of creating the solution. And if there are ways of improving that standard, then join in and tell us how. And there is a not-for-profit organization, which is the Due Diligence Council, that is designed to own and steer the standard going forward. It is your standard. It is one that we should treat as a community, and we should improve together.
Hear, hear. And that's actually one of the questions I wanted to ask, and maybe we can talk a bit more fulsomely about. Sydney, Michael, you travel around the world. You've been talking about these concepts for some time now. What has been the reception to this idea of a safety capacity index, due diligence index?
Phenomenal. Globally phenomenal.
Yes. Although, Michael, I mean, one thing, yes, phenomenal, absolutely. I am always struck, though, by the cognitive dissonance between, on the one hand, a phenomenal reception. Oh, absolutely. Of course, this is what we should be doing. Yes, of course, safety is about capacities to make things go well. Of course, we get this. Absolutely. Oh my God, this is it. But oh, by the way, we need to keep measuring TRIFA because industry is still doing it. And so there is this funky, clumsy landscape of transition that we are in that somehow needs managing, I think, both practically and intellectually. And it'd be interesting to have a brief chinwag about that, because I'm sure colleagues in the room face the same sort of constraints and expectations and obligations as their industry sees them, even though, as Michael explained, there is no obligation to measure any negative measure. But you know, the transition phase is going to be long and arduous and painful. And so, what do we do, Michael? How do you typically respond to keep people moving through that phase?
Well, I mean, I think we discussed this as a group and with a number of clients. I mean, if it makes an organization, feel good to keep a safety blanket and continue to measure TRIFA, then they can continue to measure it. But just measure the due diligence index while you do it. Then over time, we hope, is that you'll see the value of the due diligence index. You'll see the insights that you're getting out of the due diligence index, and you will effectively dim the light on TRIFR.
So yes, absolutely. However, I think we're omitting one really important thing, and that is, and I know there's some colleagues on the call to whom I've said this, the first thing you really need to do, even if, all right, your industry goes, oh, no, you need TRIFR. You need to measure TRIFR. You need to show us TRIFR. And your board members, would go ape if you don't show them TRIFR. Make the first step and disconnect any financial reward from your TRIFR number. That is an incredibly important step, because without it, you can jump high and low, say dim the light on TRIFR, but the light on TRIFR will not be dimmed because it translates cash. And I think what Kelvin's major realization was, Kel, what was it, 10 years ago, right? When you all of a sudden saw the light, right? I see the light. It's about money, right? And so can you tell us about that epiphany? Because I think it's critical in helping us through this transition. If Kel.
Thanks. We'll get a live mic.
Yep.
Come up here, Kelvin.
I'll stand. I'll probably do this. I've said Mike, I'll talk too much now, but I'll try not to do that. Look, it was interesting, and I think this realization was Michael and I jointly had this experience on the same day in a meeting. We were actually in London. We were meeting with leaders of the mining industry, and for me, I had thought the reason we're in safety is just to do the good work, is to, and therefore, if there was a problem with TRIFR and it wasn't helping us to enable to create this safety capacity, we would naturally migrate to a much more logical measure. And that's the discussion we had with these safety leaders. And it was going through the course of that we were backwards and forwards on TRIFR and the strengths and weaknesses and all those things, and the incentives that attach to that. And it really became clear to me that point is that these safety leaders had a measure which had very significant financial connection, not only to them, but to the senior leadership in their businesses that understood, and they understood how to manage this number. This number, they had understood how to tame it, how to control it, and what we were asking them to do is to step out into the real world and see real numbers about workers done and safety capacity, but they did not know how to tame this number. So we were asking them to throw away their ability to generate bonuses and just go for the journey. And that was my realization, is that's a big hurdle to jump over.
I remember the meeting, Kelvin, and I remember the enthusiasm to a new way, or the resistance to the new way, depending on what your TRIFR number looked like as an organisation. The better your number, the more you're resistant to way. The worse your number, the more open-minded you were about change.
And I think the next day we went to a meeting where they were looking at how well their TRIFR numbers were performing, and followed that examining their increasing number of fatalities that were occurring at the same time. So interesting how these things just aren't getting connected.
And Kel,
we can
stay on the mic for the moment. Now that we've said this, and I think most colleagues would easily identify with what you've said. To what extent, and let me preface this by saying I am not a fan for incentivizing or bonusing safety performance at all. I think it's part of it, right? That's what you're there for, right? You get paid enough. What the hell? We're not going to play with people's lives or injuries or the outcome of operations, which is, ultimately you get measured on these outcomes if you do it this way. I think it's very quickly an ethical thing to do. But okay, suppose companies come back and say, yeah, but we do want to vote for safety. What is it in DDI-S that gives you and Michael the confidence where you can say, okay, colleagues, look at this. You can actually attach cash to that if you want people to feel that they're incentivized good numbers. And if you do that, what protections do we have that keep us out of the realm of the same sort of taming and manipulation that has happened with TRIFR to get good numbers?
So I think we'll actually go through some of this in
Yeah.
the presentation that Alan and myself will do
Yeah,
after this. We'll
yeah,
unpack this,
Mm.
but
Thank
we're actually putting those that do the work in charge of things a bit. So
Right.
what I'm not arguing, because I think I've given up this argument to some degree, is that you can't have incentives. And I think we've got to live with that. But let's put
Thank you.
yeah, let's put the right incentives in place and give people incentives that encourage, capacity building. If you're building capacity with the organisation, that's worth. I remember having this discussion with a board when they were all incentived against TRIFR, and they had particular parts of their business were doing excellent work in trying to improve a whole range of things in safety in their organisations, and they had other parts of their business that were not. But the one that was doing the good work had a few incidents, and as a result, lost all their bonuses. And the other part of the business that was not doing what needed to be done, didn't happen to have any incidents in place, and all got their bonus and were rewarded. So it was like a really, that process was not encouraging the good work that you wanted. It was simply encouraging people to manage the number.
The question of incentives and TRIFR and whether you migrate incentives to DDI-S is a big topic. And the reality is, one of the revelations, one of the eye-opening moments for me was how much that conversation requires us to bring on board the institutional investors. I think for people here who are listed companies, it's all good and well to talk about what you want to do. But unless your institutional investors are on board with some of the ideas that you put forward, you're going to meet a lot of very powerful resistance very quickly. So one of the stakeholders that you need to bring on board, at least for a listed company, is that group of institutional investors, and bring them on board, perhaps in relation to the idea of the due diligence index, and bring them in as part of a community. Now I share the apprehension around tying bonuses or incentives to TRIFR. There's a lot written on this in the spirit of the community that we're part of, calling out some colleagues who are not here, academics who are not here, who are prolific writers. Andrew Hopkins has written a book on that issue fairly recently that I think has got a lot of good insights based on studies of petrochemical companies overseas. And one of the things that I will say is that, although the United States does not have personal liability provisions, they've thrown many executives in jail.
Yes.
But they've thrown them in jail because of manipulation of TRIFR statistics, because TRIFR rates then have a financial incentive, not just for the corporation and certainly for the individual executives, but also government grants and the like. And so manipulation of TRIFR rates then is a fraud, because the individual then gains a financial incentive. And there have been many people who have actually been jailed in the United States, not because of the safety, but because of fraudulent activity around safety data. So interesting area to navigate at the best of times, but it shows you how prolific the lack of integrity issue is around some of those TRIFR measures. There's been a lot written about the problems with tying incentives with lag indicators. There is a very famous report, Digging Deeper report, which was New South Wales Mining. That's a lifetime ago for most people. I think some people in this room weren't even born when that report was around, and yet the incentives are still in existence, etc. I think it's an area. If there's going to be incentives, at least make them tied to good measures, and measures that are constructive from a safety perspective, and have the integrity and quality assurance that I will unpack for you during the course of today.
Beautiful. I want to take the moment to see if there's any questions in the room, things that you would like to ask Michael, Sydney, or Kelvin, as we are starting in this kind of theory space and before we move into looking at the due diligence index itself. We'll have a mic come around. If you can keep I'll start with on the live stream, your questions into the live chat, and we'll be monitoring that as well.
Hi, everyone. Just a quick, and Sydney or Michael, you can answer this. The word community came up, and I guess for me, that's a real important one, because how are you moving forward with this, with that community? Because there's running world expert and playing field experts. Everyone goes, no, this is the right way to do it. This is how we do it. So I think it's a great initiative. What's your thoughts on how do you guys keep moving forward with this community? How do we build this community?
Well, firstly, we've created a website for people to join up. It's not, you're not joining up by pay, you're joining up by saying, I commit to being part of this community. The only relation to that community that we're trying to create is that people and if they go the standard, that they adopt the standard and measure it, so that we're doing Apple out with Apple. If there are feedback on the standard, as the who are involved in the part provide us with feedback around it, then that becomes the next version of the standard. If there's a consensus around the need for that, or that it's included industry bodies in particular count with not-for-profit organisation. We have included industry, existing industry leaders, particularly the ones who were first adopters, who now have years of pain associated with this particular project, because in many respects they have a head. People who, woken up in the morning and thought, oh yeah, I've heard something about the due diligence index, let me comment about it. These are not people who are bloggers who are blogging or doing something else. These are people who have actually invested time in this project, and people are interested in being part of that council, or being part of the leadership of that council. All they have to do is put up their hand and be involved. And we've had people approach us and say they would like to be involved in a process. We don't feel a particular level of ownership or exclusivity around it. What we're trying to do is saying, this is a bunch of people who had a lifetime to try and improve safety. In many respects, each and every one of us could be making a lot more money dedicated to that work doing our day jobs. We have done a lot of selfless things in trying to come up with something, and that's a good start for the profession as a way forward. And that's all we're saying. It's a good start for the profession.
I think yes. That's almost too modest, Michael. I think we can really answer the question, and I really appreciate you connect to the idea of community and that we're all part of this and we're all in this together. You can answer it two levels. The first is the tactical one, which is where Michael answered most of it already. Then what are the tactics we're going to use? Is convince, cajole, strong arm, illustrate, show the research, get it out in the literature. We were doing it away. It's now on Michael's, so who knows how it's happening because he's standing and talking. But I love it because you're my co-author, right? So so we're doing all that. But beyond that, I think there is a point at which we can put faith in system dynamics and complexity theory. And I want to use those two to illustrate what I mean. So system dynamics, of course, talks about self-reinforcing and feedback loops. And just to say that more is more, right? And that nothing is more true than that for the DDI-S. More is more. The more people do this, the more people will be doing this. Remember sociology talking about this as the consensus authority. Why are you? Well, everybody's doing it, so everybody is doing it. We're not there yet. Absolutely not. But there will be a point at which that is the case, because everybody's doing it. Everybody's doing it because everybody's doing it. And so we somehow leverage and exploit and perhaps co-opt that feature of system dynamics. to our own benefit. I predict. Well, I have a dream. I have a dream. I have a dream that there will be a tipping point.
Mm.
And of course, tipping points are a key feature of complexity science, complexity theory, right? A tipping point at which just a little bit more of the same will lead to vastly different. And that little bit more of the same is when, say, a large organization or another organization embraces this as the way to have a sense of their due diligence in relation to health and safety. What do we know when that tipping point has occurred? It's when the question starts changing. That the question is not, hey, that's interesting. What are you doing there? Can we do this too? Because that would be a cool question to get now, right? That's the phase we're in. We're on this side of the tipping point, on this side of the edge of that chaotic transition. We change that question, or it will spontaneously change, and then we know we're there. From, hey, that's interesting. What are you doing? Can we do this too? To, what? Everybody? Which? They're idiots. And so once we're home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just wanted to engage also with, I don't think anyone can accuse Sydney of modesty, and so that's one word that I don't think will ever be called. But the reality is, if I use the analogy of vaccination policies, when at some point a canned fruit company was first to say vaccination is the way forward in relation to COVID. A lot of people were suspicious, not quite sure, etc. Then an airline said it, and then everyone's saying, well, that must be the way to go. Then a bunch of people did what happened. The same dynamic happened on the same issue in New Zealand. A bunch of companies did it, and then major airline in that country did it, and then everyone was following. If I look at the people who have already adopted, and then the list of people lining up to adopt, we're going to get very close very quickly to the idea, why aren't you doing this? Are you crazy? That Sydney's talking about, rather than what is this interesting thing that you're talking about. And here we're talking about global organizations that have reached out off the back of the article that is the science that underpins this, which is the capacity index article that Sydney co-authored, which, to underpin the point, this is a peer-reviewed journal article published in International Review Journal, which, if you're not familiar with that particular journal, it's the official journal of the International Labour Organization. You might know it as the ILO. And
which is the United Nations body, translated in French and Spanish, and of course it's English. And so, yep, we're exactly. Thanks, Mike. Sorry. Keep going. So that little known
niche
that very
publication.
niche publication,
Yeah.
that little pamphlet, thinks that our work is stacks up. You can have comfort that if after peer review in that journal, and as Sydney just shared with you, that the journal thinks that this is an article worth publishing in its 100-year anniversary edition, and to translate in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and French, that you're on a good thing, and that the index is something that's here to stay. If we were to rattle off the list of global companies that are adopting this or in the process of adopting this, it will make you blush in terms of the who's who globally. So this is not a fleeting idea. This is 4 years worth of investment, and it's not Sydney and I, well, no, Kelvin. It's actually the community of people who have invested in it at the outset.
Mm.
The people who've taken it up as pilots, people who have behind the scenes to actually not just grapple with it and make it work, but also kind of come back and say, do you know what, this doesn't actually work. Let's try something else. Let's do this. Let's do that. Or guys, back to the drawing board of this. Whatever you're saying, nice in theory, but doesn't work in practice. We've been through that pain 4 years in the making. It's not something we came up with yesterday. So can I ask you all to kind of at least give it a red hot go, because at least that labour deserves a considered approach. You have my thanks by engaging with it. You have my complete disdain if you simply fleetingly reject it without a proper engagement.
I think we have another question. Do we? I saw other hands up.
I just want to ask, when this standard gets up and going, is this going to go through Australian standards, or be a huge cost and all that to safety people?
Roger, I could not think of anything worse. As you well know, and as you pointed out in your question, that is a full organisation that has commercialised its product to make it completely inaccessible to the community. And I don't understand how engagement with that body would be counterintuitive to what we're trying to do, which is get a message out and make it an open source approach. One of the organisations, as you well know, is an organisation you're very fond of, which is the Australian Institute of Health and Safety, and that is a body that has formed part of the council and is involved. And I can see similar bodies around the world. And we're in conversations with them, being also supporters and adopters. And it's more likely that it will be a standard of most type bodies, provided it can be open source. It's very important to us that this is open source. I think it's a fundamental pillar of this initiative, and a testament to everyone involved that this is a commitment that we independently came up with and all agreed on right from the outset. Invest the time and effort to make this accessible to everybody as an open source.
Do we have another question in the room? I think we have one over here.
Thank you so much. Obviously, it's a brilliant tool, fully support it. I'm just curious to know whether or not people maybe more advanced on the journey can correlate some connection in terms of reduction in incident rates, because you'd think that by implementing all of this, you're going to start to see reductions in your LTIs naturally, or less incidents and injuries across the board. So how can we kind of measure and correlate it back to the index as such, that performance measure in terms of reduction?
A great question, and those who have piloted the initiative will be gracing the stage shortly, I think, and I will defer to them to share that information.
All right. Any other questions in the room? Just put your hand up if you've got one. Couple online? Okay. I might go to the ones online. So, question from Glenn Adams online. Have any boards expressed interest or taken steps to look at adopting the DDI?
Well, firstly, the boards of the pilot organisations. Secondly, yes, a number of boards are in the process of adopting this approach.
Yeah. And we've got a question from Courtney Newman. Can some of the big players looking to pilot adopt be named? Well, I will name the ones that we're going to have on stage very, very shortly. We have Belinda Flynn with us from Cube, and we also have Kurt Warren from Hanson Youngkin showcase their approach to things. So we'll be hearing from them very shortly.
I'll also name Transgrid.
In the room.
Krista is here, no longer at Transgrid, but she led that initiative at Grid, and Nicole has actually shared with us some information in relation to that, continuing a legacy, Krista. So that's well, three organisations. There are many more. I don't think it's fair to name organisations that actually implemented the due diligence index. They've expressed an interest, but I can say airline manufacturers are interested. Major global manufacturers are interested across a number of industries, and a warehousing data company. I don't know what you would call it. Something like that.
Warehousing data?
I don't
Very
know.
specific,
I don't know.
Michael.
I don't know.
Warehousing data.
I don't know how you.
I
would
can't
call that
imagine what that
organisation.
would be.
Yes, I don't know. Some very rich person's company. Anyway.
So a few.
Yes.
Fantastic. Any other questions before I say thank you to Michael and Sydney and we move into, we have one more.
Hugh Bridges, Transdev Australasia. Thank you very much for this morning, and I appreciate the amount of effort you put in over the last 4 years to develop this tool. And I'm looking forward to taking my business in due course, and we'll see how that goes. And we'll have the discussions both with the Australian directors and then the French directors. I'm not sure your paper was in French, was it?
Yes, it
Good,
is.
that's helpful. My French isn't that great. Anyway, getting to the question. You were speaking earlier about being able to benchmark, and that seemed to be a big focus. Whereas to me, yeah, great, I can hold up against other transport operators and say how great or not. Surely the principle here should be to allow directors and the executive to measure performance within their own business and make sure it's improving. Doesn't matter what you're doing against the competition. It's that ongoing improvement. Just a comment, please.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the idea of sharing the data centrally is actually, so the way that the index works is that we have categorized the number to be actually based on resilience engineering, and Kelvin will talk about that. But let's call it, at layers, traffic light layers, where there is, if you get a particular number, we think you're doing well. If you get a lower number, then you're not doing as well. And so there is a way in which you would have an indication of what that looks like in the organization. The comment about benchmarking is really, and this this is something that I was very particular about, and I drove the team crazy around that, and I'll admit that. But those who know me, they know that can be very persuasive. And the reason for that is I had the non-executive director of a listed company in mind, and I had her in mind for that reason. I had her in mind because the value of a non-executive director is that they go from one organization to organization, and they try and gain insight from one organization and share it with another. And the only way in which you can tap into that fantastic network, locally, globally, because there tend to be global directors in many cases, and it doesn't have to be listed companies. I'm referring to listed companies for good reason, but actually, it can be non-executive directors of privately owned companies. There are many who sit at also advisory boards and the like. The value that they add is bringing that insight from an organization. If you give them the tools to carry over that insight and say, actually, you think you're doing well, but at another organization that I'm on the board of, they're doing much better. And here are some of the ideas that they have put forward to improve their DDI number from X to Y. Then you've tapped into something. You've tapped into something very, very powerful. And I've seen very powerful MDs jump at the wink of an NED, and I've seen, and when I talk about the other stakeholder, institutional investors, I've seen executives really respond to institutional investors. So if you tap into those two networks, I think you're doing really well. That's also continuous improvement is not built in it. Continuous improvement will be built as part of bringing market internally as me. Thanks you, and I look forward to working with you on that project.
And in fact, this entire conversation questions we've got coming in from the live stream, which is why do organisations that choose to need to report their data to the DDI-S with the Due Diligence Council?
Exactly for that reason.
It's exactly for that reason. And
So,
sorry, go for it,
so
Kevin.
I just saw a message come in from Professor Mike M, one of our in the US, had an interesting contribution. He said, wouldn't DDI-S and its hopeful longitudinal evidence then naturally be part of socially relevant investing strategies by external stakeholders? I thought interesting observation.
Great observation. Yeah.
I think nodding.
Beautiful. Well, I think with that, I'll have everyone say thank you very much to Michael and Cindy for getting us started today. So with that background in mind, where do we end up? We've talked a lot about this due diligence index. What does it look like? For those of you who haven't had a sticky beak at the website so far, Kelvin and I are going to give you a bit of a demonstration of the index. So Kelvin, I'll let you join us in a couple of minutes. Stretch. We had okay.
The DDI-S has been developed to provide a metric for boards and executives of organisations to understand the presence of safety as a capacity within their organisation, with an eye on eventually replacing outdated safety measures, including TRIFR and LTI. Ahead of the launch of the index, we got the authors and designers of the index together.
I'm Michael Turmer, Managing Partner of Cloud & Co.
Hey, I'm Sydney Decker. I'm a professor at Delft University in the Netherlands and Griffith University up in Brisbane.
I'm Kelvin Ken, Managing Director for Art of Work.
I'm Eleanor Titterton, Partner at Cloud & Co.
To discuss the origins of the index, how this tool could be used to communicate safety as a capacity at a board level, the open source foundation of the tool, and the need for a new way of measuring safety.
So the scholarly scientific story behind this, I think, really starts at least 10 years ago, if not more, with the realization that I think many people in industry would share, that measuring safety by the absence of negative events, of which you have ever fewer, becomes an increasingly silly exercise that doesn't really yield any information about how safe the system actually is. This is compounded by lots of data that that organizations have been sharing with us and that show up in the research, in fact, globally, that a record of low numbers of negative events, that is, you have very few personal injuries or have very few incidents, is actually not predictive for whether you're going to blow things up and have fatal accidents or major incidents just tomorrow. They may, in fact, just be around the corner. There's a number of reasons for why those things are not predictive for badness generally, but the more important, I think, scientific realization was this: the idea that as long as we keep measuring safety by the absence of something and we try to reduce whatever it is that we don't want, at some point we're going to run out of anything to measure. At some point we're going to then run out of knowing what to do to make it even better. And so there's a silliness that is locked up in this, that is actually, known by the formal name of formal phrase of the fundamental regulator paradox. If you want to regulate a complex machine, then it becomes very difficult to do so if the only data trace that you're getting out of that machine is some negative that is close or at zero. What are you going to run the bloody thing on, right? And this is the the transition that started happening with work colleagues like Eric Holnagel and others some 10 years ago, that said safety should really be seen as the presence of capacities that make things go well, rather than the absence of negatives. Because if you see safety as the presence of capacities that make things go well, there's stuff to do, there's stuff to latch onto. It's a positive story. It's a story of managing, of building a culture, of making things happen, of actionable items that you can latch onto and attach some forward-looking accountability to. So that's the broader story that drove into view the dire need for something concrete for industry to start working with.
I mean, for me, one of the exciting things about this project has been it's been a story of collaboration and a story of like-minded people coming together to solve a problem in the most constructive way. So I think this group came together specifically around a particular project briefed by a client, which started with what is the justification for moving away from the existing indicators? And is there any reason, any threat associated with moving away from TRIFR and other negative performance indicators? A footnote to that project was, can we come up with an alternative to that? Interestingly, the people associated with this took the challenge of coming up with the alternative and made that the project rather than the easy task of putting down something, which I think is a credit to this collective and the approach, the constructive approach that we've each respectively have taken to safety. How do we make it better? How do we actually come up with things that are positive? How do we construct ways in which people can find tools that they can use in a practical way? It's very easy to tear something down. It's a lot harder to build something up and to withstand the scrutiny of your peers in terms of what you have built up and recommended as an approach. And so in that sense, that was what brought us all together. It was a project around whether TRIFR has an underlying
overview of the standard itself, what's informed the standard in terms of the key philosophies, the legislative framework around officers being expected to undertake due diligence that Michael was talking about before. We talk about elements of due diligence, which you see on this slide now. And we talk about the acquiring knowledge, the gaining of the understanding, the resourcing, the monitoring performance, ensuring legal compliance, and attending to verification of those resources and processes being in place, and the fact that there is a KPI against each one of those elements. We outline that the standard is informed by safety management and resilience engineering research, and it's informed by a point of view that sees safety as the presence of positives, as we've been talking about in that earlier session today, rather than the absence of negatives. We provide a short discussion on the need for change on safety performance reporting and the limitations of the traditional approach. And we provide some references like that international labour review paper that Michael and Sydney were talking about earlier today as well. So there's even a link to the paper there if you want to go and read that paper later. So the standard then adopts a consistent structure throughout. And for each element of due diligence that you see here on this slide, we do have that DDI-S key performance indicator developed and assigned. So for each of the 6 KPIs that make up the index, we set out for you the due diligence element itself, the purpose of the element, the KPI measure that's been developed for each of those elements, how that KPI measure links to the element of due diligence. So if you're having to explain that to someone else, there's a explanation there for you. And then we also provide guidance in terms of core definitions relevant to the KPI so that everyone can have a shared understanding of concepts and can apply them consistently, because as Michael was saying, part of what we want to do here is make it possible for it to be comparable and to enable that benchmarking between organisations, because often that's what board members want to see. So then we then set out the methodology for data collection and for the calculations required for the metric. And finally, we give some guidance on reporting against that particular metric and how you might actually provide some qualitative discussion around the metrics as well as part of that process. So with that general design of the standard in mind, it's a good juncture to turn to the individual metrics.
Yeah. What I've done is I've just taken you now into the DDI-S website. For each element, there's a page that looks like this in essence. So, okay, the internet's sad, so I've got to make the internet happy.
I'm going to use that.
Yeah.
The internet's sad.
Yeah, give me a second. I don't know where Sydney was going.
Sydney's with us at all times. Careful what you say.
Okay. Is that good now? Yep. All right. Just got to get back now to the screen. Yeah. So for each of the stand, and what we've done, we sort of specifically designed the website to try and make it easy for people to actually get to the standard. We figure most of us can't read standards, so we thought, well, if we can't be bothered reading standards, let's actually bring it into the website and put the the idiot's guide to the standard on the website. So that's in essence what I do. But in essence, it sort of lays out the standard as Alan has explained. It goes into explain the data collection points. It will then also go into a bit more detail, give some of the definitions that are relevant to each part of the section, and then it'll actually go to the methodology. Now, so we're going to have a look firstly at the no standard. So what we've got here on this screen is these are the data points that actually go in for the, if you like, these are the inputs that are required to construct the no index. Now, it's all working around this concept of worker insights. Now, if you look, there's a definition of what worker insights sitting within the standard. So please engage in that, debate with us, share with us, all those things. But it's not restrictive, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah,
Eleanor.
I think that's right.
It gives you a fair bit of scope to decide what a worker insight is for you. But the fundamental principle is that it's an interaction with a frontline worker and also a manager or a leader in some way. Now, this is the first point. Michael talked about this calibration point into the standard that we brought in, is we Uberized it. So we took lessons out of, out of disruption and thought, well, what has disruption taught us that helps us calibrate, whether something's working or not working within that space. And the first point of that was when Uber came around and started success is they came up with their star rating, in terms of you rated the driver for how well the driver performed, and the driver rated the rider for how well the rider behaved or interacted. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. You can actually go and look at how the drivers have rated you as an Uber passenger. You can see your score and you can compare it with others.
I'm always concerned when I go by 0.1 or 0.2 down. I'm like, who were you?
Yeah, Mark and I have had this competition, so we go through how well we're tracking with the Uber driver. But that's the principle. What happens here is the interaction, there's a feedback measure, which is simply a rating that goes back to rate how well that experience went. So the leader rates the team, in terms of how well he thought it went from his point of view about where they were up to and how they were going. But also the recipients, being the team who've had the worker insight, rate back that experience from the leader. How well did that transaction go as such? And then we basically integrate those scores. I'm not going to take you through the magic of the back end of it, but it all goes through this process. And what comes out, the other input that you're going to need, you're going to look at firstly now, the number of worker insights that are taken, the number of worker insights that are effectively closed out. We'll always have a debate about that, but you'll have to work that through as how you determine the effectiveness of the closeout. But it was also a reason why we put the calibration point in, is we think it's all really great. And then when we come up with the calibration, the score is actually calibrated and adjusted against that interactive score between, that experience rating between the two. And then we also calibrate this on the basis of number of hours worked. So we scale it up and down so that, that the count isn't the important thing. It's actually how it's relative to the different organisations. It's scaled up and down. What you end up is a result rating from that. In this case, for example, I can just give you a quick demonstration. If I increase our numbers up to 300 here, I'll probably have to even be more. You can see the scores changing there. It will then change the grading out the other side. Now, I'll give you a little bit of insight into this, just to show you. Sorry. So you'll see on the top right-hand side of the screen is the grading system that we use. So we basically categorise our score, and we then allocate where it actually fits within this scored grading. That was Michael's talking about, the language that we've introduced. So whether the result is a critical result, whether it's fragile, so we're using the resilience language in the space as understanding if the system is in a fragile state, if it's brittle, resilient, in essence, or you're actually, best in class, and this is, a really well functioning state, it's optimal. So for 5 of the 6 elements, we grade them all against this basis, and that's where you end up in the process. Now, the thing that we didn't do just before, on your table with the QR codes, there was one for Sydney session. So the QR code number 1, if you got the chance, fill that back in with Sydney and Michael. We're very keen to watch you do that. But also, as we go through each of these elements, there's a really quick little sample survey. We're interested to know, whether this makes sense to you or not, or how it fits.
So we're interested at this particular juncture with the QR code you've got here in seeing what the current approach to worker insights is. And what happens on this element 1 metric is that you, coming out of all of those data points, is this metric, worker insight experience feedback weighting by percentage of worker insights effectively closed out per million hours worked. That's the metric for element 1, and that's mapped to that element 1 of due diligence, which is acquiring and keeping up to date knowledge of health and safety matters. So you can see that gaining those worker insights is helping you to acquire that knowledge. Yeah, you can see the link between that metric and that element of due diligence there.
Yeah, and so I'll just note here, if you look in the standard, there's quite a what complicated looking formula that works out how to calculate this. What we're going to give you, we're going to be putting up onto the DDI website is a tool which you can just run the calculation. All the algorithms are built into it, so you'll be able to take it and do it yourselves.
That's exciting. That's the most exciting thing that's been said today. You're not going to have to do the math yourself. Kelvin did it for you. All right, so we can move into element 2, and element 2 is gaining an understanding of the nature of the operations of the organisation and generally the hazards and risks associated with those operations. So what that translates into is a metric for learning team experience feedback weighting by the number of working hours invested in learning teams per million hours worked. And learning teams has a definition, but again, very broadly defined, so it can be capturing different types of ways you might be doing that activity, but you have that definition in the standard itself for what is a learning team. And how do we get that learning team experience feedback? Very similarly to that element 1 Uber sort of model of the 1 to 5 star rating, we've built in an experience feedback test for the learning team experience. So what we will do through that is on a 1 to 5 scale, we'd be asking each individual worker to rate the quality of their learning team experience. And similarly, leaders who participate in the learning team are also asked to report on that 1 to 5 scale whether they gained valuable insight from that learning team experience. So very difficult to manipulate when you're getting that sort of user data weighting through this metric as well.
So going back to the math, there's only a few inputs into this particular measure. So the first thing that we're looking for is how much And it's really, it's the level of engagement or commitment from the hours to the team. So we're trying to understand, you know, if this is this just something that runs, you know, sporadically, or is it part of the commitment of the organisation to understand how work is done? Look at the number of hours that are committed to this. We didn't go a number of learning teams because learning teams have all different shapes and sizes, and really small transactional, lots of them, credible, or you might have a large one trying to do a complex thing, and that's also credible in that space.
So we're not just counting the number of things.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we also need to know the total hours worked, so we can then start to benchmark that. But then the interesting part of this is from the learning team themselves. So it comes from the participants of the learning team. Go back and get their feedback of their experience of the learning team. Now, lots of learning teams in this space, and there's lots of things that affect this number in essence. It's the trust equation that sits into learning teams. You're going to get some sense of that. Did anything happen as a result? Was that because with learning teams, it's very much designed to be a partnership with these workers. So simple metric is a really interesting calibrator about how well you work in teams. So you might get a great number for the amount of time that testing and learning teams, but what you're asking now is for the end consumers of that learning team to say, well, is that actually meaningful or not for how work is done? So in essence, the metric is relatively simple in that space, but there's a bit of complexity behind and how we get there.
So we have another QR code, our understand. So just make sure that you've grabbed that QR code. Answering those questions as we work. I'll let people grab it.
Yeah, so, and you can catch up at any point in time.
Yeah.
Right.
Element 3. So
favorite.
is it, you know what? I think this is my favorite too. We were just talking about this yesterday. We actually think element 3 is our favorite. That's how sad we are. We love this so much that we have a favorite. So element 3, resourcing, ensuring that the organisation has appropriate resources and processes in place to eliminate or minimise risk to health and safety. And in this resourcing element, what we've done with the metric is to say that the metric is resources provided rating by line and operational management. But let me drill down into that a little bit. So that's what element 3 of the officer due diligence obligation requires, that leaders are effectively resourcing health and safety. And we've talked about safety being the presence of positives and the presence of various capacities. Resources and proactive processes of health and safety management are examples of organisational capacity. So in order for organisations and officers to have the chance to enable more things to go right, there's a need to invest in the capacity of the people and the process of the organisation. So we're looking at the difference between resources required and the resources actually provided in order to arrive at a resources provider rating. And that is derived from information gathered from frontline and operational management, as well as subject matter experts. And we've built in a resources survey where we're asking, do you have what you need to perform your work safely and successfully? And there's a whole host of questions on the different factors that go into resources, right?
Yeah, they're up on sort of just putting on screen. There's, in essence, we look at these different categories. We look at it in 3 contexts. First being the context of people who are doing the work.
Yeah.
Right, we know where they're provided, and we've combined the term there, you know, in terms of successfully and safely. So we haven't just said do this safely, because we all know at the front line what drives work is the expectations of the demands of what you have to complete. So doing the work well is an equal partner with doing the work safely in that space. So the things that we touch on in these 3 domains are tools and equipment. And basically we ask people whether they're provided with what they need to do that work successfully and safely, and they respond in a Likert scale 1 to 5. Tools are very helpful. Tools are unhelpful in that space. So we sample that all the way through. Same with the materials and procedures. Are the procedures? Are we giving you procedures that are actually helpful? Are those swims going to score a 5 or not? Now, this is a dangerous space for safety professionals. Is we're going to ask end users of all this stuff that we create to get constant live feedback about the stuff that they're using in that space. All right. And we talk also not just about procedures, but work methods, because these things have different contexts. Some are prescribed and some are cultural and experiential. We ask them about supervision and management. So for frontline, we ask them, is the supervision and management actually helping you to work, productively and safely, or making it harder, in essence? So there's a bit of truth telling in this space. Then we're really interested in communication training skills of not only, we're sort of interested in them feeding back to us. Are we giving you the training that you need to do the things that we're asking of you? And equally, we ask of the people that we've asked you to work with, have they got the skills that they need to actually make it happen? So this is all of the stuff that's come out of resilience engineering, is understanding these dynamics. And then the final component of this is we talk about capacity and demand in this space. So the final section of this is about the demand equation, which talks about, are the work delivery demands matched with your capacity to complete the work safely or not? Are you provided with the time that you need to perform your work, productively and safely? And that's where some of the really interesting stuff is. So that's the first context. So we do that in the context of the workers, and we repeat the exercise for the management team. And you're thinking, well, management team are going to say it's all, great. The fact is they don't.
No.
They express their frustrations about not having the resources and everything on board. They're working within constraints as well. And then the third domain is we ask, yourselves really as subject matter experts, is what's your view on how people are set up for work? So get that technical. So, and again, the actual mechanism of this process is fairly simple. We have a process, and we've created forms for this that you'll all be able to take away and use to do sample these surveys. It's all built in, so you can just put all the data in, it'll come out the other side. But in essence, what we end up is with a graded score. So we end up with a frontline score, supervisors and managers, and basically we look at, these are averaged out to see that is what the resources score is looking like. It's looking at the interdependency of those three things to see how they're going.
And while that's the end score, I actually think one of the fascinating and really interesting aspects of this particular metric is those sub-scores and the difference between them. And I really think there's the capacity for enabling curiosity there about, okay, we have perception differences at different levels. What's behind that? And you can actually ask better, more informed, curious questions as leaders, as board members about, well, where's the gap and why is there a gap there and how do we close that?
So
if
Eleanor,
the resources aren't there that we think are there.
Imagine if we ran this survey over an investigation and went back and asked these questions, what we were provided with, all of those sorts of questions. And then we might start to find, well, what's happening with our procedures here or our work methods, or what's happening with communication and training, in that space. So it opens up a whole new level of curious inquiry.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got QR code for approach to resourcing. So make sure that you've answered those live poll questions as we work through as well.
Yeah, I won't put the form up. I think we'll talk that through, but I thought the QR code was there.
It's on the earlier page, I think.
Oh, there you go. It's on their page.
You've got it in front of you.
Yeah.
So. Brilliant. So yeah, we've built those survey forms for you for those three different groups, so you'll have access to those too. So element 4 is monitoring. So considering information regarding incidents, hazards and risks and responding in a timely way to that information. And when you think about what the monitoring of health and safety performance requires, it's essentially requiring the resourcing of investigation processes for, incidents, investigation process for hazards and risks, right? So Michael was making that distinction between incidents and the hazards and risks part in that conversation before. We've built something that captures all three of those things here in element 4. So the metric is number of learning reviews and learning teams per million hours worked. And when we say learning reviews, we're talking about the investigation of incidents, and we mean incidents that are notifiable to safety regulators, incidents that result in injury, incidents that may be classified as serious near miss or near hit events. So that's where you get some of that hazard and risk piece, not just incidents. And we're also talking about the investigation of success. So learning reviews for that. And learning teams are defined in this context as investigations of everyday work operations that are about learning from normal work rather than incident investigation as well.
And so basically it's quite a simple metric. We need to know the number of hours worked to calibrate it. And then we simply look at, the number of these on a rate basis. And then that then goes into our table of assigning it to where does that play out. So maybe I'll do 10 of these and see what happens. We're really rocking.
We're good. So we have a question for you on this element 4 in the live poll as well. I think it's on the next page. So please grab that QR code. Just want to see what your current approach is to investigation processes generally. So if we move into
This is your favourite one.
element 5, it's not my favourite. I just said before that element 3 is my favourite. But element 5, sure, I'm a lawyer, therefore the legal compliance part is my favourite bit. So element 5 is ensuring the organisation has processes in place to comply with all work health and safety duties and obligations under legislation. And this is really that obligation of officers to have assurance that they've got arrangements in place around legal compliance. So given that element 5 of the due diligence obligation is all about legal compliance, we've translated that into a metric that is percentage of legal compliance audit corrective actions closed out. And I actually remember having multiple conversations with some of our pilot participants around what the metric ought to be here in this element 5. And we were talking about, number of legal compliance audits. And we thought, actually, that's not meaningful at all. What's meaningful is, are we actually closing out on the legal compliance gap? And so that's why we've got that metric there, right? So if you've identified through legal compliance audits that you do have compliance gaps, how are we closing that out? How much of that are we closing out? So really simple metric here. And
and I came back to Eleanor. I had a question. You sure it's that simple? I
was like, yep.
I thought lawyers and
simple. What?
Simple.
Yeah, your head was spinning. It's like, surely you want some complexity in here, Alan. Nope.
But again, it's about giving us an insight and thinking about where we need to ask better questions.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're having trouble closing out on a legal compliance gap, why is that? And it enables that questioning.
Now, the one thing we'll note here within the system, when you get the actual dashboard report, this has a different scale that we actually on our grading system here. The language is different. So this is all 5 are the same on the descriptors. They're based on our resilience engineering descriptive language. This one is been designed for a governance language. So we start at the base of this saying this score is materially non-compliant, insufficient compliance, approaching compliant, and compliant being that you're meeting all of your obligations. You're effectively closing out your audits.
Yeah, and we are talking about legal compliance audits here rather than systems audits. Yeah. So we've got a little QR code. Just make sure that everyone's grabbed that for our element 5 question on your current approach to legal compliance audits. And we can move to element 6, I think, our final element. So this is about verification, personally and proactively verifying the provision and use of the resources and processes outlined earlier. So given that element 6 is all about verification, what we've done is translate that into measuring the extent to which the organisation, its leadership and its people are engaged and actually benefiting from the effort that's going towards building health and safety capacity. So that's why we have a safety net promoter score for element 6.
Again, one of the things we like to do is not invent anything. So this has really just been an adaptation of Net Promoter Score. I don't think there's anyone in the room who won't have been subjected to Net Promoter Score in one form or another. If you've ever been asked, would you recommend this product, to a friend or relative and rate it on a scale of 0 to 10, that's the Net Promoter Score. You can actually find scores for nearly every organisation in the world, how they're performing on Net Promoter. And all we've done is said, well, let's take that same principle and apply it to safety to see, well, let's understand, our approach and culture and everything else tested on Net Promoter. And we simply go out, and the idea is all these numbers are designed to be constantly running in the business, but is to be constantly sampling out there across your workforce and management and leadership, everyone in this space, is whether they would recommend the way that you do safety at your organisation to a friend or family member or a colleague and give it a score. Now, it's interesting, the data that comes back out of this, because you get 3 domains of data that comes into this space. You get your detractors, you get your passives, and you get your promoters, and you can map this out from the data that comes back, and you can start to have a look at that. Well, where are our promoters? The passives are the people who don't care one way or the other. In essence, they'll change. They'll change their football team. They don't care. If we win a premiership, I'll go with whoever's winning. The detractors are the people who are actively saying this is unhelpful. This is not helping us do our work, or a whole range of other things in that space. So it's really interesting to understand. And if runs well, the only thing I warn you is, and it's the reason why we went to a scale of one of the interpreting of this is, I can nearly guarantee you everyone who runs a safety Net Promoter Score will end up with a negative score to start with, because the score simply takes the number of promoters and the number of detractors, and in most safety experiences, I'm sorry to say, it tends to be more detractors than promoters.
But maybe if we change the conversation about safety capacity, we might change the dial on that. Maybe.
But what's really interesting is, once you get this data, it empowers you to go and understand why they're not. And what we've found is the reason is different in nearly every application. It might be around how communication's happening. It might be around the trust equation that's happening. It might be about how they're set up, the equipment or the procedures or the compliance, or this doesn't answer the question for you. It simply gives you a place to look and understand, and then start that journey of curiosity.
Yeah, it's another place for enabling that curiosity, right? And the question that we actually ask for the Safety Net Promoter Score is, how likely is it that you would recommend the way that health and safety is practiced in your organisation to a friend or workmate? That's the question we're asking. Yeah, so a really simple question. Has everyone grabbed the element 6 QR code and answered our question there? You've got them on the table, but
I think you just want to make sure they answer element 5.
I care about all the elements equally. They're all my children. I'm not getting enough laughs in this room, I gotta say. You're all very, curiously paying attention. I love it.
Right.
Okay.
What we'll do is we'll get some of the data and come back.
Yeah.
To the, but just to give you, there's different ways to display the data. What you're going to end up with as an output is, you can display this in any visual way that you want. We've used dials, for example, just in dashboard mode. To give you an example of what that looks like, you can do it in spider plots to see how you're performing in that space. Or you can put the dashboard up and see how all the different elements are performing. Now, this data is live connected. The tool that we're going to get you will not only calculate that tool, it'll give you these plots as well. You can embed them as tools if you wish to do that.
And those are all going to be available through the Due Diligence Index Council website.
So I think that the biggest design principle that's sitting in here, we've made a specific decision to calibrate all of the measures to this 1 to 5 scale. to make it immediately obvious to someone who's not educated in the safety measure or whatever they're looking like, how it's performing as such. So they can ask questions quickly without being an expert in what the measure is as such. And there's pluses and minuses to that, but I think in terms of working with boards, having clear, defined numbers, and part of the process is, as the redesign happens, we might make some adjustments and fine tuning as we go, and that's why we want some feedback in that process. But it's a really simple output as such.
Yeah. Do we have questions? Oh, we have questions. Great. I'll start maybe down here. Do we have a mic that can run?
With the verification piece, so the net promoter score, how frequent does that have to be conducted, a valid sample?
Yeah, and in our design process, we wanted to get away from the answer completely. We this works best when it's a random sample that happens constantly, like a small sample size and just rotating through. What you want to see is, since what trending, going up, going down. Often with our approach before, we've taken an annual survey, all the issues, and by the time we analyse it 3 months later and talk about it, they've all disappeared. What we want from this is the ability, something happening here, let's go and have a chat and see what's at play. So yeah, it should be a constant data stream that you're getting.
Now we had another one over here. Yeah.
I have two questions. My first is, what's the relationship between all 6 elements? So if you dial up on one, are you likely to see a dial up on the other or another? And the second is, in terms of your composites for the DDI-S, do all hold the same weight in that final number?
They all the same weight. That was part of the design criteria, because when we looked at the 6 elements, they're all important in their own right. But really, it's not more important than the other. We might think that understand is more important, for example, but when we go back and verify and how operate in terms of people's engagement and things, it's equally critical and important. So we did make that decision that all have an equal standing, but I would say they stand independently of each other. I don't think there's a real crossover in any of the metrics as such.
That learning something different in each one.
That's right. Yeah, they're independent activities as such.
Michael, do you want to say something?
Yeah, Tom. I would just that the 1 to 5 rating, you can't really gamble by dialing up one then the other, because you ultimately, whatever that number is, will just do 1 to 5, which kind of maxes out, and therefore your compounded score will be a reflection of each one.
Any questions?
Sorry. What's the recommended frequency behind the KPIs to get measured for the due diligence index?
Well, you've got to look at the individual metrics as such, but the majority of them are constant sampling in place. So if I take resource, for example, that should be a feed that you're getting, at all. So you might look at the progression of a project and look at what that from that resource measurement as such. It actually gives you, because there's other data we can draw. This is one output, but we can actually give you a data of the resilience of that work. We actually plot the capacity versus the demands, and actually can look at so with all of the design that to be the case, but in essence, is if I think about the legal compliance one, that you might think about how you position that in a time point of view. But the idea is we just
and that's actually more powerful, that you've got a real-time sort of pulse on what's really going on in an organisation that enables that curiosity continuously as well.
I want to pull out something here that we've thought a lot about in this process, and Michael has touched on this and Sydney touched on it before. We were trying to reach into predictive capacity of measures, where if I got a high TRIFR number, that wasn't giving me any predictive capacity saying where the next significant event was going to occur. It was a mystery box. But if I look at the resource measurement and look at if that number is not performing well, it's not telling me something has gone wrong, but I can read from that there's a predictive capacity in here saying I need to, as a management team, go and unpack this and understand why it's not and what's happening here, because it will. So the issue around demands in that score, for example, say that you're getting a really poor result because people haven't got the time to do the work, and they've got goal conflicts that are in place. If it hasn't gone wrong, it's going to go wrong. So the design of this is very much to pick up that idea of predictive capacity, and that's why it's a sort of constant stream.
Yeah, I think we have one here.
I was just going to ask, what's the application of this index across contracted work?
So when you look at some of the definitions in the standard, workers includes employees and contractors. So the idea is that it would be capturing everyone.
Yeah, in the definitions and stuff there, we've said this should include both groups of workers. Absolutely, and this comes through our approach. And there's a lot of people in this room that the majority of the people performing their work are contractors and such.
Yeah.
So. And you can manage your data and have a look at that. But the fact is, we've gone and saying we need to think about people as a team, irrespective of supply source. Right? If you're going to understand work and where it goes wrong, it's got to say, let's look at as people are one resource.
Just a quick question. The integrity of the information flowing into this.
So I've lost where the question.
Sorry,
Oh,
it's just right in front.
Yeah.
Just the integrity of the data, obviously going into this system is critical. Is there any suggestions, or is there going to be any information to assist organisations in implementing this into their organisations to ensure
I
that?
didn't catch your name, sorry.
Oh, Paul.
Paul.
Yeah.
Paul, because you've signed up to the due diligence index to the council, right? We'll be looking to you, to contribute your feedback about some of these things, about how we manage this. So our first design principle was anonymity is a key design in the way that we collect this. So that we were trying to help the integrity by, if we send this, and we've done this, we've sent, a contractor will end up, a little questionnaire will pop up on their phone through their SMS, and it comes up there very clearly. We don't know who inputs it in. We know the system sends it out around things, but we don't know who actually. So part of getting that integrity in place is making sure that trust is clearly committed, but there's going to be a lot of mechanics that we need to work out. There'll be things that work and things that don't work, and we've had certainly examples of people trying to unpack and work out where things came from and those sorts of things. So this is about the journey now. Yeah.
So we have a question from the live stream. Is any consideration being given to the difficulty of getting feedback data from operators on the ground?
Yeah, yes. So this is one of the principles that make this system really work is the ability to reach people independently, not through a safety management system. Right. So I'm going to flag that. And we've had lots of experience in this place. Is the safety management system is designed so that you've got to jump through all these security barriers to be able to access something in the system. You're not, and you know this story. So part of what we're talking about this first issue of losses, right, is we're advocates actually using the device, and we're having discussions about people should have them all in place. Right. But the key to this is, and what makes it work, is being able to reach people and who are connected to site. We've got so many contractors who come into site, is being able to reach them through their own connection strategy. So it's about thinking about how we manage that process to make it work effectively.
And I think it's also linked into the tools themselves that are built into the metrics, right? So you've got the worker insight process. And if you're taking people on the journey of, we actually care for your worker insight, we actually want to learn from it, then you're going to get them buying into some of that user feedback piece. So I think it's part of a broader kind of conversation about how we change, how we're engaging and building that trust. And hopefully over time, what you would see is that people wanting to input into it is actually a demonstration of going on that journey with you. But I do think it's a conversation, and you've got to start somewhere and you kind of go on the journey.
But it is a journey for us as safety professionals. This is shifting the game completely, where I think the first shift in that game is recognising about our ability to have a real contribution to the purpose of the organisations, and then delivering what they're trying to deliver, and moving us away was seen as an impediment to getting things done. So about connecting to capacity is about enabling as such. And then moving us away from being the police to being the problem solvers, the innovators, the creators in this space. And Mark and I have been on this journey, and Michael and Sydney is, there's been, if you like, the public perception of safety hasn't been great, because we seem to be the problem creators, not the problem solvers. But there's within the safety group, we've got this desire to be contributors and such, but we've been constrained by the measurement framework. That's been the biggest constraint that we've had in place. We've had to respond to this reactive nature of incidents and things that were. This will release us from that pressure, and we're going to now get the questions from our boards and leadership. Well, how do you guys build capacity? Come on, give us some answers in that space.
I know we're going over time, but I think the conversation is helpful. We've got one last question here, and I think Michael wanted to say something as well.
I just wondered if you've given consideration to organisational scale. So I've come over from New Zealand, for example, and we have primarily small and medium enterprise.
So that's where the speaker is.
It's right here.
Oh, right. Sorry. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, thanks. Go.
Yeah, sorry. So my question was really around, have you considered organisational scale? Over in New Zealand, we have primarily small and medium enterprise businesses and less very large organisations.
Yeah. I think the really nice thing, I think this scales really well. And I think smaller organisations will do this easier than large organisations to a degree. And that's because in small organisations, the types of conversations we're asking to happen nearly as a matter of fact, about when we start to talk about the resourcing area, about how people are set up. I think small organisations do those types of things really well, even if in an informal way. So there's not a lot of bureaucracy to this, and it doesn't need a lot of investment. It can actually happen quite easily. So I'm very interested to see some small organisations, start to have a look at this and see whether the assumptions are correct or not, whether we've got it wrong.
Give us the feedback. Be part of a community that's making it better.
Yeah.
Michael.
That was exactly the comment I was going to make, that both you, Alno, and Kelvin made. I mean, it's obvious already from the engagement today, through the comments, that there's some really good feedback from this community, and a constructive feedback. We want you to go away and try and break this. Tell us if we've missed something. Tell us if it can be gamed. We don't want something to be gamed. Tell us if we've missed. The scale question is a good one. The contrast question is a good one. We think we've covered off those issues, but we haven't. We want your feedback. We want you to be on this journey with us. So please feel empowered to do that. We want that. What we want to have at the end of the day is a step forward in the conversation around a reporting measure that is more meaningful.
And with those final observations, I think it's time for morning tea. So I hope we've given you something to talk about and think about and ponder on over the morning tea break.
I'm just going to suggest you might find Sam wandering around with a pair of glasses on. So don't be completely zoned out, but he'll come around and probably have some conversations, which if you're okay with that, just let him know, but that allows us to capture those conversations and feedback and process. And we'll make that material available after the session as well.
So we'll come back at 11:40. In the meantime, I think we'll have Roger live sketches up on the screen, see where he's at. Enjoy morning tea. See you back at 11:40.
build something up and to withstand the scrutiny of your peers in terms of what you have built up and recommended as an approach. And so in that sense, that was what brought us all together. It was a project around whether TRIFR has an underlying value, and resoundingly, the answer that this group came up with was that it did not, and in fact, it was, in many respects, misleading in terms of what it was measuring and what it was telling you, and how it was encouraging you to spend your resources and time. And then, secondly, if it wasn't TRIFR, what else could it be? And I remember Kelvin coming into a room with a big spreadsheet and saying, "What do you think of this? What do you think of that?" And then we sat there for an entire day, just tearing apart all the alternatives as being not fit for purpose, not being appropriate as measures for going forward. And interestingly, one of the reasons that we got involved, Alan and I, in Clyde & Co., was this myth around the fact that there was something legal about TRIFR. There was some underlying legal obligation for a board to report on TRIFR, that moving away from it would expose a board to liability, either personally or organisationally. And of course, the organisation we're working with was a global organisation, a global mining organisation, and so the answer had to be not just an Australian answer, but rather a global answer. Would moving away from TRIFR somehow expose them to liability? Well, interestingly, when you survey the laws around the world, you find no justification for why you would use TRIFR as a reporting mechanism. More so, given all the problems associated with TRIFR, there is a very valid argument that you might be creating risks by simply relying on TRIFR as a measure of safety performance. And that's a very confronting proposition to put forward. But it's an accurate proposition. It's what the conclusion that the survey of the legal obligation leads you to. And so this challenge of actually coming up with something that had a legal foundation, in addition to having a safety integrity intellectually, academically, and in practice, was the challenge that we all embraced.
I'll tell you this, guys. I'll tell you this. The idea that I always get when I look at the due diligence index now, it looks, what's the right word? It somehow has a finished look, as in it's comprehensive, it's complete, it's all there. It's all there. It's all there. Not only that, what we found very quickly was the beautiful overlap between the due diligence requirements that sit in this index and the research based on resilient engineering, telling us how organizations can survive in a complex adaptive universe where they actually have to adapt and change and meet challenges that they don't even know yet are around the corner. And so, to me, the convergence of those two lines belie the amount of work that Kelvin and Michael and Elena did, as well as others, to figure out what should go in, what should go out. Because by the time you end up with the product that we now have, you go, yeah, that makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. Why are you not yet measuring it?
That's it. I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, the most satisfying aspect of this project was actually the collaboration with clients who were giving us data and feedback around what works and what doesn't work. And us having to actually respond to that and tweak and try something else. And
but Michael, but the touchstone wasn't necessarily the client base, because in science we get tired of this, oh, how do I apply this type of question that you always get, right? No. We got to think about what's the next thing, where to push ahead. You worry about the problems today, we worry about the problems tomorrow, right? That's our job. And so what mattered for me, what the touchstone was for me, for us here in science, in the research base, was what does the scholarly literature say about these indices and what they tell us about how safety and resilience really is organized in an organization? And what it turns out to be is, oh my God, it's there. It is there. There's nothing that's not there. And so that's what's so exciting about it.
And what I love is that it is really giving officers that assurance piece around their personal legal obligations as well. It's all fully aligned across all of that, that it is linked to each of those 6 elements of officer due diligence under the work health and safety legislation, but in a practical way that brings people closer to how work is actually performed and understanding that state of capacity.
But as you were, as you were interrogating, that's the wrong word, inviting business to comment, reflect, help guide what is in, what is out, how these things should be done. Michael, Elena, particularly you, how did you manage this main concern that people come back to and say, oh, so you're telling me to do more work? I cannot do more work. There's already, we're oozing with initiative fatigue. Go away. Don't make me measure more. Right? How do you parry that? What do you say? What is the message that we have?
I think it's a question of what do you want to put the effort in and what return do you want from that effort? For me, a lot of effort goes into measuring something that really has no safety value and makes you feel good about, just measuring what everyone else is measuring, being part of the pack. And the challenge has been to actually convince people to start thinking about measuring things that give them some insight, that actually give them some guidance, that achieve the objective that they are setting out to achieve. And these are real conversations that we're having with board members. These are not conversations, theoretical conversations. What people want out of a safety performance indicator is what Alana referred to, the assurance that safety is working in their organisation. They actually have a state of safety in their organisation. We can talk and debate that. They want to know that they are meeting their legal obligations, and then thirdly, they want to compare their performance to their peers. Now, most of these conversations are driven by non-executive directors. These are individuals who sit on multiple boards, who jump from board to board, and want to, in a quick way, be able to compare the safety performance of one organisation they're on to another. That's the value that they add to the organisation at a board level. The value they add is their insights from sitting on multiple boards. And to me, TRIFA meets none of those criteria, none of them. It gives you no insight in relation to the state of safety. It gives you no assurance from a legal obligation perspective, and it's not comparable because you're not comparing apples with apples.
But the answer I think that people really need to hear to deal with the concern that I first meant, assurance is good, it's all necessary, but you're probably measuring this stuff already. Just those words, right? Unless that is patent and empirically untrue, but something like that, we're not just asking you to do a whole bunch more work than you're already doing. You're already doing this. You're just not using it. You're not asking the right questions about these things that you probably are already measuring.
I'm not sure that that's right, though, Sydney, just because I think it depends on the organisation and the state of their maturity and where they are in this conversation, right?
Well,
so for some organisations, they're on the safety differently journey. They're seeing people as the solution, and they're already ready for some of that because they are doing learning teams, they are doing worker insights. But for a whole bunch of organisations, these concepts of those sorts of things are brand new, and so it really depends where the organisation is, how quickly they can go on this journey, and they need to understand that it is a journey that's going to take them a number of years to go on. But they are going to be learning about safety capacity all the way along, and they will be maturing through that and learning about their maturity through that.
One of the things we're not tackling in these conversations, to build on Alma's point and the point that you're making, Sid, is the fact that the people that are most invested in Safety One are the very people who are required to collect the data for the board reporting. So you're probably right that the business probably has some form of worker insight activity going on. There's probably some form of learning teams going on, but it's going on at an operational level. What the challenge that we've encountered is that a lot of the safety institutional and bureaucratic exercises are tightly held by the safety professional. And so for them, in some organisations, if they're not already on this journey, this is a step change. And in some cases, it can be quite confronting because they have an institution, a system, a way of measuring things. That way of measuring things gives them comfort. They have presented to the board that this is the measure that validates the series of bureaucratic activities that underpin the safety program. And guess what? They've been successful in convincing boards of that fallacy. That requires walking back probably a decade's worth, if not more, of, to borrow a terminology in a different context, drift away from the purpose of indicators. This has been a drift by the safety profession away from the true calling of safety.
So if we move into that true calling and we think about capacity, Kelvin, I know that this is an area that you are absolutely passionate about, that gave rise to, in a sense, being part of and driving collaboration and thinking about performance differently. I'm very keen for you to unpack how does the due diligence index then measure performance differently? What does it actually do? Or you can answer the question, what doesn't it do? Because obviously we can't give you the coffee maker, toaster, and the oven all in one. So you've had to, in this collaboration, narrow things down. So what does it actually measure? What's it actually do? And what doesn't it do?
So I think a number of things that we should touch on. I go back to Michael's reflection about when we sat down with a spreadsheet of all of the measures that were in place. And particularly we'd seen a shift into this concept of lead and lag indicators and some perception that lead indicators were about capacity. And what was very clear when we look at all of that is the lead indicators were not about capacity. They were about the counting of things in the majority of space. The lag indicators, and again, Michael, you use this term, predictive capacity, and Sid's been talking about this a lot. Neither the lead nor the lag indicators give predictive capacity about where the next safety problem is going to occur, or where you've got no true safety capacity in the organisation or not. And Michael, I still reflect on a conversation where we sat down over coffee in the Natural History Museum in London with a piece of paper and doing a sketch on it, and started talking about the due diligence elements in that space and how they connected to all the ideas that Sid and all of that had brought through about this idea of capacity. And in this context, it was very much about thinking about how do we connect and change the conversation with the board, and how do we connect them to understanding the safety capacity of the organisation. And that's where the format of this started to materialise. The index itself, I think one of its first purposes is to shift that conversation with the board, is to get them to ask better questions. So rather than point the finger is, why is this number not lower than it is, the TRIFR number? Because that's I think the boards understand is this number is a number, it should be smaller. They don't even understand what the context of that number is to any regard. And also, we've got this problem of chicken and egg, because Sid, you're talking about, we've got this industry of safety that goes, if its purpose is to produce this stuff and report to boards. So they're saying we're meeting the needs of the board, they're demanding all of stuff. And then you go to the board and then they're saying, well, other organisations count this and therefore we should be counting these things. Therefore our safety team should be reporting all of these things. None of these discussions were about that predictive safety capacity, in the organisation. And that's where the due diligence index, I think, has its real power. It creates a discussion particularly about learning. I think that's the real shift in the due diligence index is let's embrace the learning organisation type thinking and the activities around safety too, and understand how do we understand work is done, how do we understand how that work is done successfully, and what are the things that challenge that work. And this is where the index really starts to enable that process. It's built around worker insight. It's built around learning teams. It's built around understanding the difference between work is done and work is intended and the gaps that sit beside that. It's built around understanding how we comply with our obligations, and it's built on a true verification of, are people truly engaged, and what does that engagement actually look like from a very simple format. So I think that's the nature of the elements. It goes into meeting those obligations for the board, but it also changes what and how we actually talk to the board and how we talk to operational levels about what is the nature of their work and how we're meeting those requirements is a discussion they're very interested in. So it looks right to them. It then looks right to the board in they're getting a context of thinking about, it doesn't look like we've got a good match here in how we're resourcing our work and the needs of the work in that space. Why is that? What's happening in that space? What should we do differently? Let's go and get some learning teams and put more of those in place. So it's driving a different activity. And it's also shifting that recognition that expertise within the organisation really sits where the work is done, and the board is not getting that intelligence back. And this, I think the due diligence index really harnesses and recognises, how do we learn what people know so that we can make better decisions as an executive?
So I'm just wondering, you've set a great foundation. Anyone want to then talk a little bit about, well, how this has actually helped then the decision makers? Because you've called this out for the board. You've used this term, Kelvin, of predictive capacity. That makes sense not only for a board, but makes sense operationally. That facilitates learning, that leads to improvement. So I'm really interested in your reflections then. How could a board and leaders use this data more meaningfully? What different actions would it potentially drive? And I'm also very interested in the compliance question.
Yeah, Mike, I might take the first part of that in terms of that question. I think if we take one of the measures within the index, which I think is quite central to it, being the resourcing measure.
Yes.
The resourcing measure really is this question about understanding whether the organisation is providing what people need, both from a management and supervision position and how work is done, against what they need to meet to do the work of the organisation. So you got this is this goal conflict question that we're always asking in this space. The organisation generally has a need to deliver an outcome for a set of stakeholders, mainly shareholders, in that regard. So it is trying to do work as hard and fast as it can, and people are trying to meet that requirement. What this part of the index does is starts to give an indication, have we set people up for success or not? So for me, the engine of this in terms of from a leadership and board level is this gives you an indication of where do we need to unpack things and understand things more, where we're starting to see a gap between what is needed and what is provided.
Kelvin, just to that point, one of the things I really love about the methodology around that measure in the due diligence index is that we are surveying the perceptions of leaders, supervisors, workers, subject matter experts to get those perception differences so that boards can really understand what is the perception on the ground in those different cohorts. And you've got that opportunity to close those gaps where there are perception differences between what you think is there and what's actually there.
And Eleanor, the really interesting one in that is we just don't do that at the frontline worker level. We do that in that supervisor, because I think that's getting missed a lot, is that the supervisor managers haven't been set up for success to execute what they're required to do in that space. So providing these different pieces of intelligence to help the board actually think differently about its application resources is a really nice output of this measure.
And it goes to what you were saying before, Kelvin, that it's enabling them to ask better questions.
Just going to jump in and just share an actual conversation that I had with a with an organisation recently where they asked the question, how do we present board reporting? What are other organisations doing? And what is the standard way in which information is presented in relation to safety performance? I thought that was a really high quality question. So I took the opportunity with a particularly progressive safety 2 HSC to put forward the due diligence index. And they put that forward. And then there were a series of other backwards and forwards clarifications that then went on. And I was quite surprised that there was this level of pushback. So I asked.
Coming back to the tables, that would be wonderful. Those on the live stream, hope you've gone and got yourself a cup of tea. And ready to hear from some of our pilot participants for this second half of our session today. So we're keen to understand what our audience in the room and on the live stream think about the potential barriers to the implementation of the DDI-S. So we would love it if you could scan that QR code that is on the next slide, I think. Kelvin's picking up when I'm putting down. Still no laughter. You are a tough crowd. I have never had a tougher crowd. I know. Do you want to take over, Mel? They're not laughing at my jokes. Maybe they'll laugh at yours. All right. So, and it's the DDI-S implementation QR code for those in the room. You've got that QR code on the table in front of you. So I now have the great privilege of introducing one of the great thinkers in health and safety working in construction, Kurt Warren. Kurt is the National HSE and Quality Manager for Hansen Yuncken. And Kurt and Hansen Yuncken have been one of our founding pilot participants for the DDI-S, and they're also now members of the Due Diligence Index Council, which we'll speak a bit more about in our panel session shortly. Kurt's put a case study together for us on how Hansen Yuncken has gone about introducing due diligence metrics in their organisation and has some practical messages for you all. So Kurt, take it away. Please, welcome to Kurt.
Yeah, this is Kelvin at IT full capacity. Yeah. Okay. Well, what a wonderful opportunity to be here with everyone today. This for Hansen Yuncken has been probably about 2 years worth of work, and sort of valued sort of colleagues that we've sort of heard from already this morning. How much respect, admiration we have for those individuals to come together and try and create a solution. So I wanted to just give you a quick, Kelvin, if you go to the next slide for me. This is just what I wanted to cover off with everyone today. I've got 20 minutes, so I have to smash this out. Eleanor is watching me in the back. So how this sort of started for Hansen Yuncken, I think is really important because it aligns very much with our way forward in a safety 2 space, and our CEO saying that we're ready for our next step in safety, but I don't want more checklists, rules and procedures. We want to do it with people. And we've spent a year listening to our business about how we might do this with people. And when I say this, not just the due diligence, but how we take our next step in safety with our people. So I'm going to give you a quick intro into that with a very short video to sort of help you understand and encapsulate what the Hansen Yuncken approach is and what we've been working on. What we did, and there's lots to do. This is not a magic wand to actually start this process. definitely for us. The future state, what that looks like, and how we sort of look at that performance in the future, the challenges that we've had within our business at a board, middle management, and with subcontractors, and some tips to help you start. But I want to preference this by saying that this is just the beginning. This is not the end. We haven't resolved all of the issues to make this work, but we are definitely an active participant in wanting to do something about it. I'm very gracious for the opportunity that Hanson Youngkin are giving us and permission to be able to do that. So next slide, Kelvin. Press play.
At Hanson Youngkin, we've always believed that everyone's ideas are worthy. It's the ideas of our workers, past and present, that have built the icons of today. And it's the minds of our workers that are reimagining the built landscape of tomorrow. The creators, the planners, the doers. Everyone who works with Hanson Youngkin is a worker, and everyone's ideas are worthy. And at Hanson Youngkin, we believe that when the many minds come together, it's iconic, light, work differently. So what is many minds? It's a call to action to come together and get curious. Better questions to those do the work. By asking the right question, we understand how the many minds connect to get work done. Because while it's the practical tools that help us build and construct, the most powerful tool we have is our minds. And when we connect our many minds, we have real care, real workers, real success, and real questions. Many minds will build the next icon and will reimagine how work gets done differently. How we work together is at the center of success because many minds make work differently.
So you can see curiosity is a huge piece of how we want to work and live as it permeates through everything that we're doing in our strategy and into the due diligence index. Next slide for me, Kelvin. So what we did, the curious question, and I think we're all asking ourselves the same thing here, is how do you measure safety performance? For us, these are key demographics that exist in our business. And from our experience, when you ask this question, nobody tells me what the number is, the color, or the dial. And you sit there and reflect on that yourself, you're going to give me some sort of qualitative insight, your lived experience perspective of what that is. And what we recognized as we started to test this is that there's different perspective. It's not the same thing all the way through. At a project leader to a board member, what is safety performance is something different. And we've struggled to really articulate what that is, reflect on what we actually have in our business to help facilitate that conversation. Next slide, please, Cole. So here's what we currently have. This is what we do. And probably not too dissimilar to what you have in your own organizations. Graphs with LTIFR, TRIFR, the detail behind it doesn't matter all that much, but you can see as it moves up and down the organization, it's in different fits. The far right-hand corner there, it's a bit hard to see, but I make the point that this is the stereotypical attempt of leading indicators, things like task observations, the number of them, pre-start inspection, these activities take place. Quite frankly, I believe that moving is a lag. They're not a lead indicator, past tense. It's not actually telling us what is the actual performance in the business. However, you can't change it overnight. These things still exist in our organisation, and as it's been said, expected to still continue to see them in some shape or form. And I guess for those demographics, they've spent a lifetime in their careers facing these types of interfaces to talk about performance. Next slide, thanks, Colin. So getting permission to do something different. The piece for us was creating awareness of what performance. and having those real frank conversations at the most senior level in the business, talking about the elements of due diligence, as you can see on the screen there, and Michael's sort of gone through. It was a turning point for our business when they finally understood that we weren't actually getting the information to be able to meet those requirements. And then from that point onward, we could start to ask some different questions. The reality check, the bottom left-hand corner there is our work differently tools. So this is moving into that safety 2 space. We've been on that journey now for 2 years. We have a 3-year strategy that we're working against. We had to create these, socialize these concepts with our people, and then start the practice. And we're in the practice of using these work differently tools now at various levels of capacity in our business. And every day it just keeps getting better and better. But I think you have to face the reality here that just saying that you're going to do worker insights doesn't mean worker insights start tomorrow. You have to build that capability within your organisation to be able to even yield the data in the first place. But it doesn't mean that you don't start. From a leadership perspective, when that penny dropped from our board, they are not getting all the information that they need to be able to maintain the due diligence aspects. They sat in a space of what is everyone else doing? A little bit like I think Kelvin, Michael and Sydney were talking about, that everyone else is doing this. And there was lots of excuses around why we shouldn't do this because of our clients and what's happening in other parts of the construction industry, what they are doing. And instead of moving in that space and saying, well, let's just continue to maintain the rage and the frustration of TRIFR and LTIFR, we could actually try to do something about it. And that was a conscious decision by our board and leadership team, that we were not comfortable to maintain the status quo. We didn't know what it was. We were committed to work with Kelvin, Sydney, Michael, and others to try and change. And so that for a board is a really big thing, because they don't know what the answer is and they're giving permission to do something that they actually don't know what it is. But they do understand that what they're doing at the moment is not great and we need to get better. Again, back to the CEO's point, we want to do it with people, we want to take our next step, and we would keep coming back to that datum point. The change management piece, I guess, this is not a revolution. You've not all come here today to be reprogrammed, and we've given you some amazing silver bullet that's going to change your world. We still haven't finished this design, and we're asking for our community of professionals and practitioners to be a part of it. And so this was a really important piece for our board, for our organisation, that we are not going to change your world tomorrow. And it's really important for them, because you let them feel that uncomfortable. I sort of look at it as my job is to put my hand in the small of their back and push. And you push to a point to that edge, but do not push them over. But you've got to make them feel uncomfortable, because this is uncomfortable reality of what's going on right now. Next slide. So what does safety performance mean? This is a fundamental piece for us. When you ask that question and reflect on it yourself, tell me what safety performance is. Tell me how you articulate that in your own organisation. And I don't want to know about your number, your colour, or your graph. Tell me what safety performance is. And we struggle to be able to do that. And I would challenge everyone in this room that you'd probably struggle as well to get the cut through from the board to the shop floor and everything in between of what is actual safety performance. So tipping our hat to Holnagle, this is our new definition of safety performance. 2 key points here: proactively plan and greater potential. What is our capacity to plan greater capacity of safety outcomes? What do we do proactively in our business to be able to do that? And the measure of success for us, we're looking at this in this financial year as the start of us implementing this. At the end of this financial year trial of where we are at the moment with this, we want to be able to reflect on if we're having better safety conversations in our business. Not a number, not a colour. They're all important things and they still exist as our world. But are we having better conversations in our business from to boardroom, everywhere in between? That is a measure of success. It is part of the measure of safety and acknowledge it's a future state. There is no silver bullet. On the left-hand side, we still have LTI, TRIFR, MTI. And we all know the benefits and the lack of benefit associated with them, but they're still part of our world, particularly in the construction space. We have the Office of Federal Safety Commissioner. And yes, it's not a legal framework, but they are a license for us to go to work. And they expect us every quarter to tell them the numbers and the injuries and the actions, and it's a license to go to work. So again, this is the analogy of pushing to the edge. I can't push over that edge because I take away the license of the business to operate. And it's a reality of our world. We've taken a view in the early stages of this development with the DDI-S to create our own words around the meaning of each of these six. I won't go through all of them now, but the point I will make is they are very much Hansen Yuncken. They are not you. What sits behind that is the six elements, and Eleanor and Kelvin have sort of taken us through that, but these are very much us, where we are now. And the point I want to make is what sits behind this is our ability to practice curiosity and start asking different questions in our business at each of those key demographics as it moves through. Next slide, Colin. So the challenges. Our capacity to work differently. We are on that journey, but we're not aided with data. There is data for us to be able to make statistical decisions on that data, limited to a degree. So we are using information, the insights from worker insights, our have-a-goes. We are getting that starting to happen in our business. But I do not have complete cut-through of a saturated data set of our ability to work differently. Not knowing that final design, it is okay. Be comfortable in not knowing that this is finished. Be comfortable in that you need to start having these conversations, start practicing curiosity at each of the levels within your business. The balance of alignment to the DDI-S and making it your own. Language in our organisation is so powerful. And we've had to change some of that language and structure to be able to start that practice of curiosity and create engagement within the organisation. Quantitative data as opposed to quantitative with colours and numbers. This is a huge fundamental shift. The DDI-S has both components here, and you can't have one without the other. Yes, you end up with the dial, but there's also the underlying current here of that qualitative conversation and using qualitative information to make and inform decisions, and it being subjective. Like if I asked you, how do you measure safety performance? Ask a senior executive about that, an operational manager about that, a blue-collar frontline worker about that. And if you allow that, you will get rich qualitative insights. Accessing the operational business intelligence. I think we had a question that sort of played around that space. There is so much knowledge out there. But for you to be able to grab hold of it in its real time and feed it up and down the organisation is difficult. We have started to do that with our Work Differently tools, and we're yielding wonderful results and insights from it. but we do not have it automated. And I do not want it to become a bureaucratic activity that now gets introduced into their world. I guess that the not having the dashboard. Do not stop yourself from starting this until you have your dashboard. That is not the first step. So please don't let it be, because you will find yourself wrapped up in the bureaucracy of aligning to the current dashboards and the software and the systems. Invest the time in the conversation with those key demographics and the need to start asking different questions. So I have that catchphrase that sits at the bottom. I think that rings true because all of these challenges that sit above here, they are all making a sound. Everything that's happening here today is making a sound. And I don't need the whole world to be able to see it or be able to show it to you in a paper, on a dashboard. It is making a sound and it is resonating with real people who do real work. Next slide, thanks, Colin. So, tips. I made the point, we're at the start and definitely not at the end. This is the first time, I guess, we've got up publicly with our peers in a very vulnerable state and said, we want you to come on this journey with us. And I'm sharing some of these tips from my own experience of commencing that journey. The coaching and support material against the key demographics in your business. I can't underestimate how important that is because it means something different to each of them. And you have different demographics layers within your business. I put it in language you understand. How to function, how to coach and mentor conversations. Saying this does not automatically create the ability of being more curious. Using existing reporting portals or capacities that already exist in your business. These things already are there. I showed you some of mine. We're going to change what some of that looks like, but we're not wholesale changing, swapping things out, putting in those existing capabilities, but not adding into it. Meeting people and the organisation where they're at. I learned this through Andrew Barrett, a wonderful colleague of ours. I think it's important to know where your people are at those demographics now. This is a future state KPI indicator. We talk about LTIFR and TRIFR as zero harm. That's the other side of the coin. The way I look at it is the due diligence index, and you've seen our 6 questions, is where we want to be in the future. And we're not going to be there tomorrow, but I expect my organisation to take a step in that direction. Each time we come together to understand the work is done, I expect to move in that direction. It is a future state indicator, not tomorrow. Talk to your clients, aligned clients. Don't worry about the rest because they're you. Spend time like we're spending time with you today with people like-minded. Don't worry about convincing the world. Or way things do not add more. That is key to the operations. Evolution, not revolution. Establish what safety performance means to your business. You need, like what we've got, our one-liner. And until you actually start at that point, you're already up against a huge challenge when you can't even articulate what that basic foundation is. And I guess being part of the solution other than what is the problem to be controlled is lag indicators. We all, lots of time, deal with the problem. But the amount of time we spend dealing with the problem shift into dealing and contributing a solution as part of this community. Next slide. Thank you. So become curious, ask more questions, and I use this graphic on the right-hand side that it feels sometimes that you're going around in circles, but you are not. You are making sound, that catchphrase. resonating. Job as a profession is to stick those together, create the spiral. There is no one else doing this for us. Our businesses will not be driving this agenda. It will be our profession and our practitioners that are doing it. And it is our responsibility to do something about it. And I know I want to stop talking about this like I've been talking about it for over 10 years. So I can't encourage you enough to do that. My time is up. Alan is standing on the side. We're going over into the stage. Happy to answer questions off to the side. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you so much, Kurt. I feel the passion and the drive that I want to get involved again, and I'm already here. So thanks for giving us that passionate insight into your approach to building this into how Hanson Young is doing board reporting. And we're going to hear more from you on the panel, because I thought 20 minutes wasn't enough. And I know people have questions for you. So I've got questions from the live stream. I'm sure we've got some questions in the room, and we'll get to those during the live panel now. So I also want to bring up another one of our pilot participants to join the panel, Belinda Flynn from Cube Holdings. Please come on up, and can we have a warm welcome for Belinda as well? Thanks so much for joining the panel. I'm also going to invite Kelvin up to join the panel. And come on, big round of applause. And I've also got Michael Toomer as a bit of a cameo on the panel as well. So come on down, guys. All right.
I shared the stage with Sydney earlier, so I didn't get my full hour.
Yeah, we've been doing some negotiating over morning tea, haven't we? So thank you all for joining me. You're some of the best and brightest in safety, and thank you so much for coming on board so early in the journey on the due diligence index as pilot participants. I was thinking about it before we set this up today, and I did a bit of a brief count of how many safety professionals were involved in the various workshops over time. And I just wanted to do a blanket shout out to everyone who was part of all of those workshops. And I think it was about 16, 17 safety professionals from different organisations being involved in those detailed workshops over time. So I want to thank them for helping us to refine our thinking to get to this version of the DDI-S that we see before us today. So I've got enough questions that I want to ask panelists, reflecting on the experience. There's a lot of questions in the room as well, so get to them too. But first, I want to ask, why did you get involved in the DDI-S program in the first place?
No, Mom would like to say it was he, but it's not. Look, I suppose for 10 years, 20 years, it's been like, we've got to get away from LTIFR and TRIFR. So I actually knew if I came Anna and Michael that it would happen. Like, I'm going in team because I know this is done. I knew that we needed to change. I don't know how I'm going to do this, but then Michael and I was like, yep, on board. It's going to happen. I know they'll make it happen.
Later, here we are.
And we're
here. You could.
One of the things that resonated with me was we took this approach from basically a crowdsourcing title, where instead of a really brave individual having a go at this and trying in their own organisation and then sharing information, trying to change, it was the first time in a long time for me in my profession that I've seen peers coming together of different denominations. You have myself in a private organisation, large, we turn over circa 1.6 a year. We've got listed companies from different walks of life, the legal fraternity with Clyde and Co, Sydney from an academic. I just sat back, this is a powerhouse. This is to be reckoned. And you've heard from him today. He speaks with such conviction. I've been pulling against the legal rooms. I feel like I'm more little swag about this conversation with a team and my peers. And that's, I guess, what got me to this point, and I guess a reflection of where we are now. On you to do the thing. Confident in that step. Your team's here. We've got run forward. We don't have that. Then we've got a red hot crack, and only get with all of the room.
And we want to be continuing to have these conversations and continue the conversation as well. So if you need help, anyone on this panel, Sydney, anyone that you've heard from today, we can help you with those conversations as well.
Just one last thing that popped in my head.
Mm.
No one was making money out of this.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of that in our profession. There's a buck to be made, and it really frustrates me that I see people bastardizing my profession to make a dollar. And putting fear into organisations that then becomes a commercial commodity for them. And the fact that we were all sharing, I showed in my slide, you would have seen HY Work Zone. We are putting everything, a whole safety management system, all of our work differently tools, that video you've seen, work differently learning experiences against those tools. They're all open source. And we have to take away this intellectual property or value or commodity of what our profession is. Ethically, it sits really uncomfortably for me, and I could see that this was part of that framework we were doing, and it would be maintained.
Couldn't put it better myself. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the process of the workshopping and piloting of the various sessions before we got to the one that we were happy to launch with. What did you learn in the process of the piloting of the index? Belinda, I might start with you. Yeah.
Do you mean like what did our organisation learn, or me personally? I think what I learnt was that there is an amazing drive to change, which I think one drive to change will get there, but also going back into my organisation, that the front line is just loving it. Like for the first time, there's a genuine question to them about what makes your job hard, what makes it easy, do you have the right resources, those kind of questions, which a lot of them have never been asked before.
Wow.
And really refreshing. We're probably used and, work in a stable environment. So we've I suppose some tough unions to deal with that actually come and say, thanks so much for doing this. We really appreciate it. And it was, sometimes the answers you get aren't great, but you know what, you take them on, you take on the feedback and you do something with it. So I think it was more the workforce that really was the great thing for us, that we sort of felt for the first time we were really authentic about what we were doing and really genuine.
Beautiful. How about you, Kurt?
I think for us, there were certain points of key milestones for us. When we started our journey in that Safety 2 space, we did this activity of asking, what do you think we should stop, start and continue to do in our business? Just an open conversation. The number one thing that came back from our business was stop measuring task observations to meet a KPI. It was driving our people insane. And when we stitched together the circles into the spiral of the overall strategy, at some point, about a year ago, this task observation thing doesn't make sense and has to change. And we couldn't know what the solution was, but this allows us to, this has created the segue to change it. You would have seen one of those questions we have now is a high-risk work check-in. We've changed the language of it. We haven't sorted it out. It's still not finished. But we are going to, with this process, remove the KPI of leaders having to do task observations once per month. It is gone. It is not going to exist. They will not be ever done again around the full SMS. They are focused around high-risk framework. I looked at from a planning perspective of a program ahead of what happened in the past, which capacity to produce better outcome around high-risk work in the next month, and be guaranteed that leaders are curious questions of that capacity to produce safer outcome around risk. So the unintended consequence in a positive way occurred as you start process, but as I said, we haven't.
Michael, what did you learn from the process?
I'm glad you asked. Patience. Patience. I don't.
Grasshopper.
I get frustrated with the time lag between a vision and proceeding in health and safety. Let alone 4 years working on a project. All jokes aside, I've actually learned how to bridge the theory into practice, and I think the main achievement of this index is how to create tools that marry up the theory that we'll talk about, and when you try to explain safety differently in signs up, because the solution problem trial one says, yeah, perfect sense. The first side of it is they go worker. You know, I've been in situations where people have adopted a safety to approach, done an investigation of seeking you know, worker insight in relation, or at least seeking the insight of you know, what went right, or what contributed to this incident, and then at the end, how could you correct this from happening again? And the answer is, oh, the worker got it wrong, even though the investigation itself on its face says didn't have the resources to do the task. But you know, if the worker followed the procedure, it would have been fine. So it's actually if there's one thing that I have found really satisfying out of this, is actually bridging that gap between the theory, the principles, the slogans, and practice. How do we actually make this into something quite viable and tangible? And the third thing is in the experience of actually working with the professional that we worked with to the moment on the Krista is in Zoom, others are online, and just actually struggling with working through the challenges associated with making it work. That period has been wonderful, and I think very satisfying.
And that constant challenging from all of those different perspectives, and it's been a continuous process of all those perspectives I've just loved. How about you, Kelvin? What did you learn through the piloting process?
I think it was the evolution process, starting from an idea that was generated and then navigating to the point that we are now. It was about collaboration and then taking lots of different perspectives into place and trying to get to a point that was true to the concepts but met the operational needs and the leadership needs in that space. And I don't believe we've still arrived at that point. We're still on a journey. And also the power of risk taking, I suppose. The whole idea that we put all this effort, and Michael, I think, between Art of Work and Clyde & Co, we've put a tremendous amount of investment into this process. And the risk taking was, well, we're just going to put this into the public domain because it's a good idea. It just needs to happen. And it was about, the joy of actually trying to get some real change made, and having much better conversations with boards. So, yeah.
I want to pick up on that theme of much better conversations with boards and get your insights into, well, how did you have the conversation with your board about, what was the language that you used to kind of get them on board, pun intended. Still knowing this crap.
Thought it was funny. Conversation with board, I think I started a very long time ago and was kind of getting nowhere. I feel like in maybe the last 2 years that I've started getting somewhere. And it was really about being, I suppose, making the influence on the board, knew were open to change. And I suppose the organisation that I work in, it's a very flat structure. We've got some directors that used to be in operational environments. So it was really focusing on them, those to work with me, to be able to say, it's all about the workforce here. We've got to move away from this crazy, someone, injures their finger and has 2 days off, and that means that we're a bad performer. So it was getting a couple of directors really on board that we could go together as a force, and then being able to talk to the board. It's the board, the institutional board.
Yeah.
When you proxy advisors and investor calls, they're the checklist that goes, so your triffer's gone. And I feel like, I know what I feel like saying, but I can't. And you're like, seriously, do you really think performance is that number? Like, you have to, they're smart people, but they're not asking. And, I think that's, for me, the board, I feel like I've nearly got them there. Michael's going to get them there 100%, no pressure. No one laughed either.
I laughed. Do you hear me? I just gave you that really deep laugh.
Oh, okay. But to me, it's the insto guys and the proxy advisors. It's like, please, and I don't exactly know how we're going to get them to do that, to change. But I think that's the real challenge for me. I feel like the board will get there, but the insto guys, I don't know.
We're going to need a comms plan, aren't we, Belle?
Yeah, it's they got their checklist and they just go, what's your REM report? What is, and you just sign on. Like, really? So
The same issue applies to contracting as well, is we keep copying and pasting and setting up contracts with these performance measures. And this is, I suppose, I think we've all got a role in this, but we've actually got to stop that process and start thinking about putting measures like this, which are about engaging and having true capacity for safety in that space. But, and Kurt, I know you in this space, that the problem we get is it's nearly like a chicken and egg problem. We've got to try and break the cycle somehow.
And you're having conversations with clients all the time to try to bring them on the journey, aren't you?
Yeah, that's what I said. Talk to your clients. That the ones that are aligned will be allies when you go back into those executives and boards and go, well, this client's worth X amount of money, and they think this is a really good idea. And we have found ourselves spending time with clients at their invitation to talk about our approach to safety, and that's a social fact. So I get advised to grab hold of those facts. Board member can take it away when it might say, this sounds good, and by the way, we're tendering for X amount of work. I think that from my perspective, with how we started with our board, was when I said we stop, start, continue. They asked me early in on the piece, do you think of our business? And I said, respectfully, I'm not in a place to tell you what I think of your business because I don't know it. But I know who does, and that's your people. And so how about I come back to you and I show you that reflection of your people? And we did that, and a long story short, and basically I call it holding up the mirror. And we showed them the reflection of their business and what their people said, work as done versus where they are sitting, work as imagined. And it was very confronting. And they asked lots of questions that challenged some. Respectfully, in reply, I'm not asking if you believe it or not. I'm showing you what's going on. And that becomes a fact. And that became a segue for us to start having a different conversation. We had Michael in to talk about what is due diligence and create awareness and education of that. And then I asked them what is performance, and they tell me what that performance was. All they could give me was graphs, and stop having a clinical conversation, having a real conversation. That shifted for us, and I found my life now is my access to that operational business intelligence. I can't get it to them quick enough. We've hit the tipping point, sort of what Sydney was talking about. I don't push anymore, I get pushed. And we said to them that you should not be believing what I tell you every month and what the CEO tells you every month. Stop accepting what I put on the table. You have a legal obligation to ask me questions of this, to challenge this, to stop just accepting. And I think a lot of boards, regardless of their makeup, accept what is in front of them. They tick the box that safety is being discussed. We're moving on to how much money did we make? So I think you've got to get really real and be brave with those boards. You may survive, you may not. But my take on the world is if I don't, this is the wrong place for me to be.
I'm talking about some of those other influencers and other stakeholders, as Belle was mentioning with the sort of institutional investors. We've got a question from the live stream from Tanya about whether there's a future view to lobby regulators and bodies such as the OFSC to move away from metrics. Lagging metrics.
I think they're part of the community that we need to influence and win over. There's no doubt about that. And I think you're probably pushing at an open door with some. You'll struggle with others. As you know, don't subscribe to the view that regulators, that law be motivated in relation to what we do in relation to safety. This is what people as a safety lawyer, but at the end of the day, our job is to ensure the health and safety of our people, and let and I worry about how next. Let us do our job, and that's the regulatory environment, and the law shouldn't be a primary driver. Protecting people should be. I think that people on this panel share that view. Having said that, Belinda's mentioned that, Kurt has mentioned that we'll be happy to speak to any board this and move that obstacle in relation to
at intervals.
No,
Get a laugh on.
no, more.
That's for a laugh of the day. Oh man.
No, so we will be happy to do that. We'll be happy to engage with you and take you on that journey with your board and with your executive leadership team. You absolutely can lean on us to do that. I'm sure you can lean on Sydney and Kelvin for the same purpose. But before I move off the topic. I did want to pick up on the issue of the link between safety performance and financial performance, and this is an underrated conversation. It's a conversation that really has not emerged in this foundation maturity, and it was one project for me that will my time. The research shows clearly that better safety performing companies outperform their peers, both operationally, and there's some research that, and from a market share perspective, in terms of market performance. There are good reasons for that. We don't have the time to go into them, but if we start to really seriously and accurately measure the return on investment of safety, and not the nonsense that is bandied around, then we might actually have a chance to convince people there are good business reasons why you would invest in safety in the long term. People who've been reading my books and following what I've had to say about this for a number of years, which I know many people in this room have, know that I've been super interested in this topic for a long time, and first wrote about it around the time of Katie's birth. I remember, which makes it 15 years ago. And so, in a sense, it's something that's probably overdue for a strong refresh and a deep think and a collaboration if people are interested.
I'm conscious of time. I'm going to take one more question from the live stream. How does this work in a joint venture scenario when your organisation is the principal contractor? How does it work in that kind of context?
That's not really the case.
Wonderful.
What a cop out. Conscious pilot.
I think I said it in my presentation before, the small of their back. You're pushing them to a point where you're shooting that side. Do not keep it over there. AV that exists makes money in your business. It's really important. If you're wanting to go to part in that AV, you're going to have a conversation up front. And some will be open to it, some not. My advice would be to do it as a trial and still maintain the rage of the status quo. As much as it frustrates us, it's still a part of our world. And I'm happy for it to go sit off to the side, but you won't get engagement from me around that subject. It's there for other purposes. And I think it was said earlier on, Michael said you turn the light down on it. And what we have seen of our strategy around safety 2 and connecting it to work, not safety, is that we are having different conversations, greater engagement, and for the first time, real quantifiable results that I don't have to sell to you. I'll drag this person up in front and I'll let them speak. And that becomes the social proof of its value. And we start the tipping point. I want more and less of that.
And that final observations, Mark?
Actually, I just want to say thank you. Yeah, a big thank you for all the people who behind the scenes have organised today. You've got Naomi, there's Sam, Kelvin's team, the whole our team is here. There is Aaron from our part as well, and you see half our team scattered all over the room. The second thank you is to all of you for attending and investing the time, both online and in person. The third thank you is for the wonderful 16 people that collaborated with us and been on the journey with us, and we're really eternally grateful for you. Another thank you to Out of Work for their vision and actually partnering up with us, and the generosity of their spirit and the alignment of their values with ours. And then on a personal note, I want to acknowledge that in my team, for those who've worked with me, know that the heavy lifting gets done by others, and I publicly acknowledge that. In this case, Alana Titterton has done very much the heavy lifting, and I get far too much credit for the things that my team does. So I wanted to acknowledge that on this occasion.
Thanks, Michael. And thanks everyone for joining us today. I hope you've really got something out of it. There are a couple of additional live poll questions, so get in those last live poll results for us, and we will be sending through a summary report afterwards. Please join us for lunch if you're in the room. Thank you for joining us if you're on the live stream. Any questions that we haven't answered, we will be looking to answer for you. And for those in the room who want to ask more questions, continue the conversation, just come see us. Thanks, everyone.
Tell me about